Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are doing all right. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is Jamal Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys can hear me okay. Sounds clear, loud, all that good stuff. Not loud. Here we go. Not loud, but definitely clear. And I hope all of you are intact. Family members are safe. You're safe. Fed. Got a cup of coffee if you want one. Oh my God, that's hot and it needs a lot more sugar, but that's okay. The world is good. At least, hopefully, for all of you who are under my voice. Big news. Big news. There apparently was a breakthrough in negotiations between Moscow and Washington. And notice I said Moscow and Washington. I did not say Ukraine because these are bilateral talks. Now, the catch is the moment that you come out and acknowledge we have a proxy, that proxy has been at war with Russia. Okay, well, the proxy is less relevant to the talks that you're effectively having with the principle that you are paying that proxy to fight. Now, Zelensky is finding that out the hard way, and he is not handling this all that well. He has been welcomed to Washington. He's been getting standing ovations. He's been having Congress members. He had the key to the city. And then all of a sudden, he didn't. And all of a sudden, he's in a White House meeting being berated by Vance and by Trump. And I have to be honest with you, Vance is growing on me. Vance is growing on me. And I'm going to explain why in the chat that came out with Waltz that was leaked on Signal. Well, it wasn't leaked. He invited the guy on Signal. However, the journalist was on Signal from the Atlantic. He printed some of the stuff. He did not print all of it. Hegseth has been flipping out over, was it Hegseth on this? I thought it was Waltz. I think Waltz is the one who had information in it. What's interesting is that Waltz is trying to say he believes somebody broke into Signal. Okay, I don't believe that. But okay, if that's what you need to do in order to eschew blame from yourself, whatever. Vance, in that communications, was skeptical of attacking Yemen and skeptical for the exact same reason that I mentioned. The reason I mentioned was this looks like Joe Biden. And if you're Donald Trump, why would you ever want to look like Joe Biden? And my reasoning of this was, well, the Houthis were being bombed by the Saudis. They were being bombed by the Americans under Joe Biden. And at no point did it stop them from doing what they were doing. And your bombing campaign, when it fails, and it will fail, and they're still firing missiles into the Red Sea, you will look like Joe Biden. Meaning, there's not a military option. It's a diplomatic option. And the diplomatic option is to get the deal and make Israel abide by the deal. Trump doesn't want to do that. And so he's in this fool's errand. Now, Vance is a team player, so Vance didn't necessarily push too hard on it. But his point was, look, we get 3% out of the Red Sea. This is a European issue. Why are we once again pulling their ass out of the fire? Yeah, that. I would go further and I would say, look, there's a diplomatic solution. Make Israel abide by the deal every bit as much. Well, he hasn't been making Ukraine abide by the deal, but make your client abide by the deal. He didn't want to do that. And so now they're starting a war. Vance also pointed out, look, this is going to look like a forever war. Like, how long do you plan to do this bombing campaign? And when do you acknowledge that it's not working? Okay, well, we'll see, right? I'm saying Vance is right on that. God, I don't know how many times I can say Vance is right. Vance is right on that. Vance is right on that. But from the standpoint of Russia and the United States, breakthrough. And Mark hit me, and Mark was like, well, I got that wrong. Because Mark didn't think anything was going to come of it. No, there was a substantial breakthrough. I would call it substantial. So They're reviving the Black Sea grain deal. This is the deal that Ukraine violated by essentially sending weapons, where it's supposed to be sending grain, and Russia pulled out the deal because they were sending weapons instead of sending grain. They were violating the deal. So the talks have effectively reiterated the ceasefire in regards to energy architecture that they don't supposed to hit. Will Ukraine live up to this? I mean, they violated the first time this came up immediately, several times, almost in spite, like just purely out of spite. We're not doing this. It was basically that, right? You find all missiles screaming, F those Americans, F Donald Trump. Not going to force us to take a ceasefire. Dude, they are working in your interests. But okay, whatever. But in the Black Sea thing, ideally, they're not supposed to attack ships that are in the Black Sea. They're supposed to effectively have a ceasefire in the Black Sea. Now, this has been violated immediately because apparently Sky News is reporting that Ukraine fired a drone into the Black Sea almost immediately after the deal was reached. Now, this is not shocking, and this was something that Sergei Lavrov brought up in his interview. Ukrainian drone shot down over the Black Sea, Russia claims hours after partial ceasefire agreed. So again, F you, Donald Trump. You're not going to force us into a deal. Now, this is something that Sergei Lavrov pointed out. You got to curb your dog. That the only way this works is if you force Ukraine to do it, that you give them a direct order to do it. Now, will this work? I don't know. Up to this point, Donald Trump hasn't necessarily forcibly curbed his dog. Now, he stopped the weapon shipments when he was trying to get Zelensky to accept, let's say, a ceasefire negotiation. But what started off as this immediate ceasefire negotiation turned into a negotiation while the Russians proceed with their military action. And of course, because of that, I would wager that the ceasefire is going to be elongated, extended outward. Oh, we're talking and we're talking and we're talking, and months are falling off the calendar as we talk and talk and talk. And every word, every syllable is another dead Ukrainian. Every time I said the word a Ukrainian somewhere dies. That's what's going to happen. And why wouldn't the Russians do that? Because they're winning on the battlefield. Like Captain America said, we could do this all day. And in the Russian case, it is only in their best interest to proceed with the war. Mark is right. They gain nothing. They do gain. But the gains that are going to have to take place are going to have to be beyond the war. This is something that I have also gotten right. The negotiations that they were having extended beyond the Black Sea, extended beyond the immediate ceasefire on energy architecture. And part of those 12 hours went into things beyond the war. In that context, sanctions, meaning the first grain deal that they pushed through was supposed to also have the ability for Russia to get their grain out and to sell their grain and to have sanctions relieved on their grain. None of these things took place, meaning they violated it from jump. Joe Biden didn't necessarily care and didn't attend to it. And they, for whatever particular reason, thought that the Russians were going to abide by it while the Ukrainians, Americans, and Europeans weren't. This time around, Sergei Lavrov pointed out, we don't trust anybody. We trust what is ironclad. And in the context of being ironclad, the Black Sea deal is not revived until we get what we are supposed to get out of it, which means a relief on sanctions in regards to agricultural products, a lowering of cost, and a lowering of costs in regards to ships. So effectively, they're reviving the grain deal, but the Russians are like, this deal is revived when you hold up your part and you relieve sanctions. This is also supposed to go into Russia being allowed back onto the SWIFT system in the context of agricultural products. So you can imagine that from the Russian point of view, this deal went beyond just the Black Sea thing. It also went into the relief of sanctions. So you can imagine, in the context of trying to end the war in its entirety, all this stuff is going to have to be brought up. All of this stuff is going to have to be discussed. And no, it is not going to be overnight. It is not going to be quick. But it's progress. They're talking. Zelensky is pissed off, but he doesn't matter because these are bilateral talks. And the talks with Ukraine is just explaining what they talked about with the Russians. So they spent 12 hours talking with the Russians, 70 minutes, I think, talking with Ukraine on 2 separate days. And it was only to say, this is what we talked about, this is what we're going to do, which pissed Zelensky off because he wasn't a party to what, let's say, part of some of the stuff that the Americans agree with, especially in regards to sanction relief. He didn't particularly like it. The Americans didn't care because he had nothing to do with it in that context. You're a proxy. We will dictate to you what we're going to do. You can give us your input. You can express your feelings. It's not going to really matter. I'm going to go to my guest, though. We are joined with the man himself that can explain the things that are taking place on the African continent, Kofi Kwaku. Kofi is an African analyst and research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. And honestly, a good friend of the show. Kofi, I always enjoy these segments. I always feel like I learned something. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing okay. Nice and warm, sunny down here, so can't complain in Johannesburg.
Lucky you. Lucky you. It's cold out here. Actually, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. Kofi, thank you for joining me, man. I really do appreciate it. I saw somewhere, and it's a vague recollection, so correct me if I'm wrong. The French are also leaving another country. They left Chad. They were kicked out of the Sahel region. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's somewhere else, correct?
Yes, so it's Ivory Coast. It didn't make that much noise. But in fact, many Pan-Africanists believe it's a ruse. It's not enough. It's just leaving. They're left us with 600 soldiers, troops. And people are saying, well, it's not enough. You need to do it the way Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and especially Chad have done it. Then we can believe that the French have really retreated. In fact, it's true because Ivory Coast is like the jewel with Senegal in the neo-colonial possession of France, especially economically.
600 troops. It's like, okay, leaving in quotes. Let's put it leaving in quotes.
Yeah.
You sent me several stories, and all of these stories are fantastic.
Mm.
And I actually effectively, hey, what excites you? And to be transparent with my audience, when I bring on guests, I realize that all of these people are involved into something, and that there would be things that would excite them. And the things that excite them may be more interesting than the things that I'm thinking about, right? And so, especially since this is their subject matter. And so the first story you sent was Qatar in Africa. Now, Qatar wields a lot of, Qatar, I should say, wields a lot of, let's say, financial might across the continent. How does this translate into control in regards to African states? Because you pointed out that they have a lot of influence in African affairs.
Yeah. Well, they've used their money very well. It's a small country, about 11,000 and so square kilometers, which is close to half of the size of the Kruger National Park in South Africa, right? Mm-hmm. But they've managed to really use their money well enough so that they can even compete at international level with all sorts of other countries. I mean, this is extraordinary. So what they're attempting to do is to fill the sort of the gap that's been the geopolitical gap that's been left by the United States, Russia, China, and others in India. And they've tried their best because, West African themselves haven't been successful enough. And if you were to take, the Democratic Republic of Congo itself, it's about 2 million and something square kilometers. It's a vast country. So you would think that at least they could sort their own problem. As we said in Africa, there's something the UN and then the African Union also use that African solution for African problems. But what this Qatar sheikh, I was telling a friend of mine, it's a little bit, it's not derogatory, but I said, a man, a sheikh in sandals, summons African presidents and tell them what to do. You can see the picture. He's in sandals, and both the other African guys are so overly dressed, and they don't even think about it. Jamal.
Wait. You know what's funny about that? What's funny about that? It's not just Africans. If you remember when Joe Biden sent Blinken, I believe, to Saudi Arabia, and MBS was sitting out in his sandals in the pool, was yelling at Blinken. So I think I told argument. He was yelling at Blinken, right? So it's not just Africans; it's also Americans.
So they're filling that geopolitical gap, which is very important. But at least they're trying something, because the East African community hasn't managed to do it. Same as the Southern African Development Community, with President Ramaphosa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and all of these, they haven't been able to sort it out. So in fact, they're pulled out. In fact, the Southern African troops have been pulled out of the Eastern Congo. Mm-hmm. And at the last meeting, they've managed to ask five former African presidents, I say, to now help to negotiate and bring about peace in that region. And many of us know that it's not going to happen because of the forces, the external forces that are at play. It's not going to happen. It's so big. Something's going to have to give. There's a great deal of worry about the fact that potentially the Democratic Republic of Congo might break apart like Sudan did way back. And people are very worried.
But real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm interrupting because I'm trying to understand. That's the only reason. Why do you think that it won't happen? Like, you make the point of saying there are so many external forces that are involved, and you're bringing this up in the context of Qatar.
Yeah, I mean, remember, Qatar is same as all the Gulf region countries love African minerals, and especially two in particular, gold and diamonds. And where else can you find them cheap enough without having to deal with the Kimberley, requirements for diamonds and then the gold issues and so forth? Mm-hmm. They love gold, same as you go to Dubai. I mean, Dubai today is the number one hub for gold trading in the world. Of course, Israel is on diamonds. London is both gold and diamonds. And then New York as well, same as Amsterdam, so diamond. But these are, the Middle East today, or what people are now calling West Asia, is a huge hub for all these trafficking that gets to them. And they have to do something because they're getting much of their gold from there, illegal mining, small miners, and so forth. And they've already invested, in fact, especially in West Africa, where one of the things they do is they tend to invest with the ideological religious background. So they'll, for example, build mosques, And the other shock was just a quick information. Qatar, I think Saudi Arabia asked President Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, look, I want to build 200 mosques in your country, and I'm gonna not only fund that, but one of the requirements for me to help you with funds is to have those 200 mosques built. And President Ibrahim Traore said, no, thank you. No. You can keep your money.
I mean, they're spreading Wahhabism around. Like, this was the Hillary Clinton thing, right? Hillary Clinton was getting a bunch of money from Saudi Arabia. And WikiLeaks published a document pointing out that Hillary Clinton knew Saudi Arabia was spreading jihadists, like using their mosque as a way of doing so. So they build a mosque, they pay kids, people, all that stuff, people who are already poor, those people would get radicalized in the context of those mosques, and at that point have this kind of allegiance to Saudi Arabia. Like, it's very strange, but that's what they've been doing across the Middle East. I don't blame them for saying no.
Yeah, yeah, no, but what you're saying is true. What they're doing is buying influence. I mean,
Yeah.
remember, they've been buying influence from in the United States, in Europe for many, many years. I mean, how did these countries, Qatar, got the World Cup, football, FIFA World Cup? Everybody knows they have a very, big pocket with a lot of money, and they buy off people very quickly. And buying that influence comes also with all sorts of opportunities. And I think this is what Qatar has seen to fill that void and sneaking into that thing and the crisis in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And people will see that as a good thing because at least they're trying to do something, although it didn't succeed much, but they're still trying to do something. And that was the point.
But you're saying they're trying to either break it up. I mean, because you're saying foreign influence, and you're saying foreign influence is preventing the Democratic Republic of Congo from, let's say, resolving the conflict. And in fact, on some level, it sounds like you're saying that there are forces that are trying to split it because they want access to the mineral wealth in the DRC.
Yes. I mean, not all of them, for example, want to see the DRC split. Some are playing both games. If it's split, if not split, they know they're going to make money anyway. They're still going to, get the minerals. And Qatar is playing the peaceful right now, sort of a good cop at this stage. And they have a point. You need peace in that region. The extent to which is true and deep enough and sincere is what we have to question.
Interesting. Do you think they're being sincere? Because look, I will tell you, I've gotten very cynical about politics. Like the Ukraine war has radicalized me on this stuff. I don't think life matters. I mean, I think it matters, but I don't think world leaders think it matters. I think they play to their own ends. Basically, what can I get out of this, even if there's a war? Because in my mind, it's like, well, we should stop a war because we should stop a war. We shouldn't have people killing each other. That's not the way they think, though. And to your point, there are forces, I would imagine, that would be perfectly okay with the DRC splitting because they believe they can get, let's say, ends with the new government, especially since it's probably going to be a weak government considering it's just split. Like, give me your thoughts on the chances for reunification.
What I would say is, I would use your term, and the term also uses sincerity, is really a sincere transactional mood. They're trying to, it doesn't matter whichever way this thing goes, if it's peaceful or not peaceful, either way, they're making a transaction because they need to sort of, influence the players on the ground, the locals first, the president, and then of course they also have access to the most powerful countries in the world. And then not just countries, but also international companies that are exploiting these minerals. That is very important. And this is where I would say it's a transactional sincerity. But the rest, I mean, what do they care? I mean, there have been more than 10 million people who have been killed in the eastern part of the Congo, and it's still ongoing. The fight is displaced more than, I think, 7 also or 8 or 6 million people still roaming around trying to figure out where do they go next. So if they were really interested in this, they would have probably done something about it a long time ago. So I think the sincerity is more transactional than anything else.
What are the chances of them bringing us so close? And by the way, this is invisible in our media. Like, we don't, like the idea that 10 million people vanished off the face of the earth. And it's very rarely spoken about here. So forgive me for not being more versed on this. So I appreciate you kind of filling us in on it. You said multiple presidents are coming together in order to try to, I guess, come up with a resolution for it. What are their chances?
I think the chances are very limited. There's a lot of talks. I mean, you have President Obasanjo, all of them former president, one from Kenya, I think the other one from Tanzania. There are about five of them. I can't remember the whole list, but these were presidents who were there before. And there's a hope. I mean, hope is not quite the thing. It's like in strategy, if you hope for something, you may not get it. You got to be into the action. And these
Yeah.
people are retired. They're going to be roaming around, paying. They're going to flying around first class, and the budget of the European Union. It's not even the African Union because the African Union doesn't have money, as you know, as we talked about it last time. So
Yeah.
all these movements are being funded from outside. So the hope that something is going to happen, and then mark my word, I'll be very surprised to see that there's peace in that region because of the nature. It's such a high, very tough area to police because of the nature of the resources there. There's so, I mean, the resource level is just, the wealth there is unbelievable. Who's going to let this go so easily? And even if there were peace, how do you do that? Even among the Congolese themselves from the Democratic Republic of Congo, they don't get along, you know, and that's the difficult thing. So I'm not really confident that any peaceful solution will take place in the next year or two, but perhaps maybe the next 5 or 6 years when people are just realizing that they need to get together instead of fighting for the resource. There's enough for everybody, not only for the Congolese and the Rwandese or the Ugandans or anybody else, but the rest of the world. For Apple, for Samsung,
Yeah.
for for Huawei, all of
You
this. There's
said,
plenty of that for everybody.
did I hear you right? You said 5 years. You think they're going to be fighting for 5 more years?
Yes, yes, they're entrenched. I mean, the M23 movement, rebel movement in Eastern Congo, which is basically supported by Rwanda, is really digging up the roots. They've occupied Goma and then many other big cities or towns in that region. And they're not letting this go so easily unless they're routed out by a solid force. Um, the peace process or whatever it's called peace is not going to take place.
And the DRC doesn't have the military capability to
Of
just.
course, it doesn't. It doesn't. Government soldiers are being killed all the time in that region, and that's one
Wow.
of the reasons the M23 has managed to establish itself as a force to be reckoned with.
Wow. This is so, see, this is so different than the US government. The US government has a strong central government,
Yeah.
police, military, etc. Like it's emphatic. We will kill you if you try to do anything.
Yes.
That is amazing. Wow. That is disheartening to hear. The idea that this war that has already killed 10 million people is going to rumble on 10 more years for 5 more years is just
Yes.
unfortunate, to put it mildly. How did this start, by the way?
You mean the war in the Eastern Congo?
Yeah.
Remember, even if you took, you got to go back all the way to the 1940s. If you remember historically, when the US was looking for fissile material to make the bomb, they realized that the Belgian Congo, run by Belgium, with the king there, with the sort of search, they found that Congo had some of the best high quality level of enrichment of uranium. So they asked the Belgian government to seal the place. So the US got people, military and soldiers, to seal the place. And in fact, it is known that Einstein sent a letter after he learned about that good quality of uranium in the Congo. Because remember, the uranium in the Congo that was really used to explode in Nagasaki and in Hiroshima.
Right.
So in fact, those two cities have a sort of twin city partnership with Congo, by the way. But anyway, so Einstein sent a message to President, I think, Roosevelt, saying, hey, please make sure this, I'm going to use a derogatory term, but make sure those niggers don't control the uranium. We want that for us. Yes, the letter is out there. You can read it. But he didn't say that directly, I'm just paraphrasing a bit. So that started from there. And then, of course, the culmination is that in the 60s, when Patrice Lumumba, one of the independence leaders, was trying very hard to free the Congo from the shackles of the West, he got killed. And from there on, there have been wars among themselves. I mean, President Mobutu Sese Seko, who was there, who had Patrice Lumumba killed, who was the sort of manager of that assassination, remained in power for more than 3 decades. And the wars continues. Even under Mobutu, there was still some sort of some fighting, but not as big, until he was taken out of power with the help of the United States, Europeans pushing Rwanda and Uganda to kick him out of there. And ever since, there have been more trouble, in fact, than before. And it's been continuing ever since. That's a brief history. There's a lot more, but that's a brief history.
I'm a firm believer of leaving countries alone. Because in my mind, you can't make it better. It's like if you touch it, you break it. As soon as you touch it, you break it. It just always gets worse. And it's like countries, if you leave them to their devices, will evolve into something.
Yeah.
And it's usually better, right? But if you touch it, you break it. Every instance that I can look at the Middle East. I can look at South America. I can look at Iran, effectively us putting in the Shah and the effect that had on changing the contours of Iran into this kind of religious monarchy or religious democracy, whatever they want to call it. They call themselves a democracy, but whatever. I'm making the point. You touch it, you break it. And I think the Congo is a good example. Man, that sucks. I just hate these wars. And and I know we use the term war, but killing, starvation, illness, et cetera, just misery. The other story you mentioned, the triumphant homecoming to the South African ambassador. Oh, that's too funny. And you know what?
Yeah.
This goes into the whole Musk coming out saying there's a white genocide taking place. And I think it was Ramaphosa just kind of blew it. Dude, that's not happening. They're just making this up. I am fascinated by the white genocide thing. Where is this? I know where it's coming from. Please explain to the audience where it's coming from and what they're trying to call a white genocide. Mind you, as they back a literal genocide in Israel, no less. What are they calling a white genocide? Why are they using this terminology and this phraseology?
Well, I mean, remember, it's a nice dog whistling. It sort of goes counterpoint, but it just has resonance in places where white people feel, oh my goodness, this is really true. These people are against us. And it looks like on the other side, they look darker than us. So it's easier to justify, right? You can flip that script. And if you have, for example, this week again, Malema, the head of the leader of the Economic Freedom Fighters, the political party here in South Africa, is now, there's a famous but also terrible song that say "Kill the Boer" song, it's called. So that really shakes white people up. and in fact, it should, because it sends a signal that, many of them are not welcome. But he does that to sort of rebuttal and then attempt to crack, the shell of the racist and people who just don't want to give in, to open up and be a bit more inclusive about the wealth of this country, distribute land, make sure people have these things. So it's a way to get the debate going. But of course, it's used very cleverly to say, didn't we tell you? Here's what they're saying. They don't want us here. They're against us. This is a form of racism. This is a form of also Black supremacist way of pushing the narrative against whites and trying to drive them into the sea. And that resonates very well, not just in South Africa, small French here, but in the US. I mean, the right-wing people love these kind of things. So why? We told you so. Here they are. They're coming, with the spears and whatever it is. They want to kill us.
With spears. It's wild. I find a kinship with the Africans in South Africa, kind of, even though maybe I shouldn't. And the reason why I say that is the United States, slavery, Jim Crow, had all that stuff. And you can make an argument that Jim Crow is just apartheid, right? You're splitting up a certain section of the country. And I know in the United States case, Africans were a minority. In South Africa, Africans are a majority.
Yeah.
But we experience very similar things. Like, so the majority of the wealth in the United States is held by whites. I think it was like blacks average 14,000, whites average like 110,000, just a ridiculous skew. And it's directly related to slavery. And so in the country, they're like, okay, well, we have to do something to make up for slavery and Jim Crow. So we will have affirmative action, meaning we will create a system that incentivizes people to hire blacks at a time where they
That's
weren't
right.
trying to hire blacks.
Yeah.
And of course, now you get, that's racist because you're taking advantage and you're forcing black people into the thing. And it's like,
Yeah, you remind me of something. You remind me of something that in South Africa it should be the other way around. Say blacks should be hiring whites. You see what I mean? So we should be, and they should be happy to know that, you know, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is good for them, because then we can put them into the fold of the majority. But of course, strangely, they don't like that.
I guess my thing is like, they act as if history never happened. And
No,
it feels like that way in
blink
South
out at
Africa.
anything. Yeah. So I think that the resonant for them, they use it as a, you know, dog whistle, a good race bait, which works well because people are looking at this. Oh yeah, that's true. They're discriminating against whites because they now have laws that say, okay, if you create a company, you got to make sure that you get 10% or 15% or maybe 30% of blacks to come and join you. They think it's just not right to do that. You see. And so, but it's a law in South Africa. That's one of the reasons Elon Musk has been really angry at South Africa. In fact, I was talking about that to Rick Chance's show yesterday, that Elon Musk is unhappy because he wanted to bring Starlink to South Africa. And the laws of the country said, if you're an investor from outside, you're coming in, you got to relinquish 30% of your company's shares to a South African, black or white. However, you need to, if it's a white person, you need to make sure that there are a lot more black people also benefiting from that in the company. You see, but we know that this law and this opportunity has been hijacked by many black elites who have pocketed the 30% without distributing it correctly across the board. And that also, it's something that's really not quite right. But overall, it's a very good way to try to help people. But like all things, they're going to be hijacked. I mean, even the Doge thing in the US, as much as we think it's a great thing, somebody's going to hijack it for something else very
I
soon.
don't think, dude, I don't think it's a great thing. Because it's kind of like they name stuff and it does the opposite of what they call it. Leave no child behind. Okay, you're leaving kids behind, right? Like Elon Musk is the richest man on the planet. He has like $100 billion, some insane amount of money. He's like
400 billion.
Yeah, some insane amount of money. He is using that program to fire poor people. Like, meaning the people who work in a government job aren't balling. They might be making $50K a year. And Elon Musk decided to destroy Social Security, destroy Medicare, destroy Medicaid, fire tens of thousands of people who are just making a basic wage as the world's richest man under the notion of this is waste, fraud, and abuse. And it's like, okay, this is crazy. Like Elon Musk has no experience with Social Security to be able to fire anybody. And apparently the Social Security system crashed multiple times over the course of the last week as a result of what Musk has been doing. So it's like, yeah, it's good to get rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. Do I believe that the world's richest man, who loves the fact that he's close to power, has any experience doing that for governmental systems?
So at this stage, he's wielding two types of powers. The one is about money power, and the other one is political power.
Yes.
And unbelievable. We've never seen this. But back to your question about the triumphant return of the expelled South African ambassadors. Let me sort of quote a couple of things. He came, at the airport in Cape Town. There was a huge crowd coming for him. And he hadn't even written his report back to office report to the president. And he had a megaphone, and he was just blaring it out. He was careful, but you could see that it was a master stroke. So, and the next day, guess what? He published a powerful piece of work. And let me share with you a couple of things, especially around diplomacy. And he says, I'm just going to read them very quickly for you. Diplomacy is not the art of lying, but it is the art of telling the truth gently and constructively. Diplomacy is not flattery or denial, but it is persuasion based on intellectual honesty and integrity. Diplomacy is not abandoning your core values, but it is about universalizing them for a better world. And finally, it says here, diplomacy is not sacrificing your interests, but it is about pursuing them with dignity. But most important, let me read you the beginning of that piece. Very powerful, Jamal. And he says, when he opens up, and a very smart guy, he brings the name of his wife first. He said, Rosieda and I arrived here today, makes it human, having again been honored by our country to represent its values that are inflation and its stand for truth, justice, and the equality of all people. And finally, let me read that last sentence. It says, we are indeed moved by this warm welcome after the bewildering reaction of being declared persona non grata for intellectual and political and analyzing your host country and preparing your own country for radically new terms of engagement. And he says he's proud to wear the badge of honor of persona non grata.
Wow.
But of course, the president cannot speak like that. That's for sure, because the president say, hey, wait a minute, come down here, people. I'm a diplomat. And this is a powerful piece. Yeah.
What is South Africa expecting coming from the United States? I mean, there is like verbal stuff that, like I say, Elon Musk is putting out. Technically, Elon Musk is not part of the government, though. He's some quasi something that Trump has just kind of fixed himself. What is South Africa expecting?
Well, look, I think what's my observation really gathers that these are trying times, and we're not close to have something sorted out very quickly. And South Africa should be bracing for more tension to go for the next 4 years, that's for sure. And in fact, we just heard yesterday that President Trump has already nominated one person to be the new ambassador. Well, it's got to go through Senate first. A sort of right-wing, media guy called Leo Brent Bozell III. I'm sure you've heard about him. Okay. He used to run American Media, something consortium or council. And he's a very staunch right-wing person. He's qualified, in fact, Nelson Mandela as a terrorist and the African National Congress as a group of terrorists. So that may not go well. However, because he's probably assuming a diplomatic position now, there's a hope that perhaps he'll have a different way of pushing the narrative. He might not make it easier for South Africa, but he may have a behavior that could be maybe conciliatory or in a peaceful manner. But there's no assurance that's going to happen.
Typically, people are policy. The person who they put in a particular position gives some kind of context to the thinking of the principal in that regard. That is not a good sign that they are sending somebody who seems to be okay with apartheid to a former apartheid state. That's a little disturbing to me.
Yes, it is. So South Africa is going to be, it's going to be a long haul for South Africa, but I think what's going to come out as a success is that you need great diplomats like Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russia, but also Jay Shankar of India. All these people, I think South Africa can learn from them. We have a new foreign minister that's quite young, so he doesn't have the depth of most of these people. And I can tell you, Trump's not going to even cuddle with him. He's just going to dismiss him. And so far, South Africa hasn't had even a chance of space to have a face-to-face meeting with President Trump. It's a bit early, I must say. I mean, 2 months it's a bit early, I must say. But
Is
at
that
least
what South
the
Africa wants? I mean, Trump seems to be taking a certain tact based upon the people who are around him in regards to South Africa. Is it better to, I don't know, brave the storm? Is it better to kind of, I don't know. Give me your take on that. I mean, like, it's a conversation. Meaning, I guess, and the reason why I'm asking this is, what does South Africa expect from Trump? And should they expect anything from Trump? Like, it's a little bit weird to me. Look, all of these, look, I'm an American, right? We don't have, there are no states where America is like, with the exception of Russia, and that's because we're losing the war. But usually it's not, we need to meet with somebody. It seems to be the other way around where other countries want to meet with Trump. What does South Africa want to get out of Trump in this? And what does South Africa expect from Trump in any kind of meeting?
Look, there are many aspects to it, but for me, I see that in the value chain of this relationship, there are two things that are important, right? Power is also important. South Africa is not as powerful as the United States, but South Africa has exercised power in the way with the sort of with a very powerful moral complexity that South Africa has weaved itself around the International Court of Justice genocide case against Israel. South Africa has really elevated the moral power, and this, the US and Israel cannot really match it. And there's a gap there. They're struggling to fill that gap. And they have a natural brutal response to it. We're gonna punish South Africa. And I think that is their discourse. That is their strategy, basically. And in fact, we're not quite sure yet where is the Trump Africa strategy is, because we know during the Blinken era in July 2022, Anthony Blinken was here in Johannesburg in Pretoria, launching the US Africa strategy, but that's dead in the water. And I don't think the Trump administration will even look at it. However, with the new signs and the events that are taking place, there's great sense of worry about what will be the US Africa strategy going forward. But at the heart of it, South Africa is also asking itself a serious question. What is now, how is South Africa, the US dealing with South Africa? And so far, it's a tense thing. It's going to be a power relations. The US is trying all kinds of pull, from expropriation acts, attacking it, to racist rants, and then also using all kind of, other issues. But they're not getting there. And we all know what it is about. It's just about punishing South Africa because of the ICJ genocide case against Israel, period. Yeah. The second one is also the fight against the rising BRICS nations. And South Africa is one of the weakest links, I believe, for me, given the kind of vulnerabilities we have at home. The economy hasn't grown very much for the past 15 years. We're not even at 1%. The projection is probably 1.3 for next year or this whole year, but it's not going to happen. We know it. Electricity problems, there's social cohesion that's not quite right between black and white, and Trump is using it. He's attacking that and he's splitting people, black and whites. Although there's still a fringe of whites who are sort of very separated, but it seems like some white people are talking into a very strange language. Yes, you need to pay attention to the United States. You have to be diplomatic. They're couching most of their feelings. Many of them it doesn't matter who runs the US. That's it. If Trump says this today and it changes the tune, they're going to agree on both sides. So they already have taken side, and the US agent in South Africa, also working very hard, and they've been helped by the elite media, which just has a discourse sometimes that's just so disappointing, but they're doing their best. This is the one part. The other part is that South Africa is generally not as powerful as the US.
Yeah.
Right? So South Africa has to be somehow diplomatic in most of the things she does. But South Africa has been warned. If you keep begging and bowing your back, the boot's going to come on your head like they did for Syria or Iran, for anybody else, or Iraq. So be very careful. fix your home, put order in your home. If you put your house in order, you're most likely to face them. If you have a good economy, and employment is going to reduce, poverty also reduce. All these things fix them, and these are the vulnerabilities that I'm very worried about, and I think other people are also worried about. That makes South Africa a weak link within the BRICS.
Wow. So, wow. I mean, I guess my question would be, how would Trump do anything to South Africa in the context of BRICS? Like, let's accept for the moment that South Africa is the weak link in the BRICS chain. How would they use that in order to undermine or to somehow damage BRICS? And this could be the last question. Because you're right, Trump has put a target around BRICS. He considers it a threat on some level. How do you see that happening, where South Africa is used as let's say, as a way to damage the BRICS relationship?
Well, I mean, very simple, Jamal. If you have a community and one of the members are consistently or constantly under attack by somebody else, and the other BRICS are just talking, oh yeah, we support South Africa. They're not coming. If the US wanted to invade South Africa today, I have no clear evidence that China, Russia, India, or Iran will be sending boots on the ground to save South Africa.
They'll complain.
No ways. You see what I mean? I'm just not speculating. This is the truth. The US has a base in Botswana, right up north, a very special base. They can beef it up. In fact, Marco Rubio last week was there. And there's a lot of talks also about secession of the Western Cape province, one of the 9 provinces.
Really?
Yes. And all these right wings are saying we need the support from the US to secede from South Africa because we want to be on our own. And in fact, one of the movement people said, we want to turn Cape Town, we want Cape Town to be like Tel Aviv.
Oh. Oh, that's horrendous.
So there are all these signs, as much as they look like benign, and the more you dismiss these signs, the more you find yourself into trouble, because that's how people build. Fringe movements build very slowly, and they're very powerfully convincing because they have a narrative that most media will buy into very quickly.
Kofi, man, like I said, I'm always enlightened by these conversations, and I appreciate it because we often don't get this in our media here. Kofi Kwaku, he is an African analyst, senior research fellow at the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. My man, be safe.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Jamal. All the best.
Always,
Talk
man.
to you soon.
I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Have a good one. And I would like to bring on my next guest. I am deeply appreciative of him joining me, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson. He is distinguished visiting professor at the Government and Public Policy at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known as, retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff of United States Secretary of State Colin Powell. Colonel, welcome to the show. How you doing today? You doing all right this morning?
Well, it's a relatively decent weather day here, so I'll say yes.
Fair enough. I'll take it.
By the way, in my biographical data, you can put former in front of distinguished professor at the College of William and Mary. I've left that position.
Fair enough.
Enough said.
Would you say upset? Yeah, I would imagine that's a loss for both. I have to start off with the recent negotiations. What are your thoughts on Trump so far? It's been 2 months, feels like it's been a couple of years. He's been very frenetic. He is going with this idea of a deal by Easter. I am highly skeptical of a deal by Easter because I think the Russians, from their point of view, they're winning on the battlefield. They believe the military for Ukraine is weakening. And so the longer negotiations drag on, the better and stronger their hand is in those negotiations. But Donald Trump is pushing very hard for this kind of Easter thing. I strongly suspect that he wants to go to Russia, shakes Putin's hand, sign a document, call it a day. I'm fascinated by the fact that these are bilateral negotiations, which gets across they're our proxy, not the other way around. They're not an independent actor. But give me a take on, it's a larger overview, and we can drill down into it. But I'm curious on your overall view of this so far.
Trump is typical Trump here. I think he wants to force this issue, and he wants a deal, and he wants it as rapidly as possible. And I would support that with regard to the stupid situation that the Biden administration put us in. However, as you just pointed out, Putin has lost upwards of perhaps a little more than 300,000 soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
He's got blood invested in this conflict. And as he said repeatedly, even before he launched the special military operation, this is all about Russia's fears, existential fears of a threat from NATO so close to its border. So he's eliminated that aspect of it by force of arms, and he's won. If it were the Biden administration still in office, I think we'd have true problems solving this in any event. With Trump, it looked as if we had some hope. He stated that he was going to cut off the arms and the money, and that he was going to strong arm the Europeans with regard to the same thing, and that he was going to bring a fast and swift and successful settlement to this conflict. I don't see anything like that happening, as you've just intimated. First of all, his emissaries do not study their enemy. They do not know Russia. This is the same problem we have with Iran, Al-Ansar, the Houthis in Yemen, and with the whole Levant. They do not know history. They do not know their enemies, as it were, and they don't know how to negotiate and deal with them as a consequence. And Trump is probably the most ignorant one of them all in terms of Russia's history and Russia's character and what Putin means when he says what he means. Mm-hmm. Trump thinks he's dealing with a person as duplicitous as himself, and he's not. He's dealing with a very straightforward Russian leader who's playing poker with him and has a full house while Trump has two pair, and there's no more drawing. It's a real situation of significance, of course. People are dying. Ukraine is disappearing meter by meter. I should say kilometer by kilometer, city by city. Odessa comes next, probably. And Putin's, he's not happy, I won't say that, but he's content to keep making progress on the battlefield while we dither away with the prospect of a peace conference. And the idea of a ceasefire has become risible, laughable, because Putin has used language that would lead one to believe that he thinks a ceasefire is impossible. And I think he's right. Who would you get to police the ceasefire? A ceasefire is only effective if you have a third party, as it were, in there who's willing to shoot at, if necessary, those people breaking the ceasefire all along the line of contact. Where are you going to get such troops? Where are you going to get such a force? You're not going to get them from NATO. Putin's not going to allow that. So where are you going to get them? Well, you're going to get them from the global south, which would be a good selection. But how many troops are you going to need? And what are going to be their orders? And what are they going to do when there are infractions, which there will inevitably be from the Ukraine side, not from the Russian side? They're content with this sort of thing happening. But Ukraine is not going to be. So you're going to have daily infractions of the ceasefire. All these details have to be worked out. Trump doesn't do details. He doesn't do details. He does high-level meetings with Kim Jong-un, for example, from which nothing eventuates. Nothing comes out of it. No success at all. And then he abandons it. And I'm worried that that's might be what we do here. Meanwhile, the Europeans are trying to roil the waters, as it were, by picking up the pieces and doing it all themselves. And when you're looking at France and Germany, and you're looking at Britain in particular, England, I should say, I don't think Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland have much to say about what Starmer's doing. I think it's all the English Parliament. You're looking at a real problem. So I was roughly hopeful several weeks ago. I'm not hopeful anymore.
Wow, that is grim. That is far grimmer than I thought. Okay, two things. So for the North Korea thing, I disagree with you on the North Korea thing. It pains me to say that, and I can't even believe I'm saying it. I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, Donald Trump, you're right, he doesn't do details. He has high-level meetings with Kim Jong-un, but Kim Jong-un stops firing missiles into the Sea of Japan after those meetings. And Donald Trump stops these war game exercises off South or North Korea, where they're pretending as if they're going to depose the North Korean leader. That's not progress. I mean, when Joe Biden came in, immediately the missiles start firing once again into the Sea of Japan. Once again, Joe Biden resumes the war game exercises. Between the two, it seems that Donald Trump, if nothing else, was able to create some level of goodwill between himself and Kim Jong-un, where he stopped those actions that were freaking people out. But correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Well, you're on dangerous ground here. This is the country and the relationship I know better than any on the face of the earth.
That's why I say I'm shocked. I'm disagreeing with you, right? Correct me on this.
It's the relationship that Powell gave me pretty much carte blanche to work for 4 years while I was in the State Department. Here's what's happened, basically, that's very dangerous. First of all, Kim Jong-un is now allied with Russia, a significant alliance, as well as with Iran. These two alliances are almost Article 5 type alliances. That is to say, an attack on Kim Jong-un will be an attack on Putin. Right. And the same thing, an attack on Iran will be an attack on Putin. Now, you can say, well, I don't think he'll live up to that. Putin has shown that he is stalwart in such things, and I think he will in both cases. Second, you have to look at what Kim Jong-un's strategy is now, and then you have to look at South Korea and the lack of a strategy there. South Korea was so pumped up by Donald Trump's opening to Kim Jong-un, so enamored of the approach Trump was taking, that they were talking about finally having a peace treaty on the peninsula after so many years. They were talking about reunification, which is a significant issue for the South Koreans that we just completely ignore because we don't want reunification. We don't want a solid Korean peninsula next to China. And for that matter, Xi Jinping is a little uneasy about having a solid Korean peninsula next to his country. These are formidable people. And Xi Jinping's got enough problems on his borders to want a unified Korea there. So that's playing in it. But at the same time, you have the United States having shifted its aim to China. We have no idea of defending Korea. That's the truth of it. And that's been true for some time. We're on the Korean peninsula because it's forward positioning vis-a-vis China. Right. That's why we're there. That's why the troops are there. The Koreans know that. So this turmoil you're seeing in the political apparatus, putting presidents in jail, impeaching them and so forth, in Korea has been caused by Trump's overture to Kim Jong-un and then a failure to follow up on it. You got them all up, especially those below 40. Look at the polls. Those below 40 in South Korea, their number one goal is reunification and a peace treaty. They want the war to end. They want no prospect. They want the DMZ gone. And frankly, a lot of the chaebols, the business people in South Korea, want to exploit that cheap North Korean labor for as long as they can until it comes up to South Korean standards and demands wages and so forth. So there's all kinds of things playing in this. Basically, though, the United States has ignored him. And he is allied with Russia now, and he's perfectly content with that. He's got a defense treaty with Russia, and he's got nuclear weapons. And South Korea has talked about getting nuclear weapons. But then you've got to ask yourself some really significant questions, which I've been doing of my Korean friends. Where are you going to test? Where are you going to store your nuclear waste? That's a very tight peninsula. There's hardly any space on it for this sort of thing. Where are you going to get the money? Have you any idea what it costs to have a really modern nuclear complex? That's what got a lot of the states AQ Khan was trying to recruit to his atomic energy programs that would produce bombs. That's what got a lot of them to thinking twice and even stopping. Even Muammar Gaddafi had some second thoughts and third thoughts about spending the amount of money you got to spend on something that really is just a prestige item. You're not going to use them, and you hope nobody's going to use them on you. So these are all factors playing into the peninsula. And what happened with our Korean ally is they began to become very distrustful of us because of that opening to Kim Jong-un and nothing coming from it.
But wasn't that Joe Biden that dropped the ball on the progress that, or if there were progress, that was Donald Trump was making? Like you said, Donald Trump picked the ball up, gave overtures, and then dropped the ball. Trump lost the election. Joe Biden came in, and Joe Biden seemed to go back to old policy. Or is that not true?
Well, he went back to old policy in the sense of he went back to ignoring North Korea,
Right.
which really makes the Kim dynasty mad. Whether you're talking about Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un, any of the Kims in the last 50 years, what really makes them mad is when the superpower ignores them. And so they do things. They go out into the sea and they attack Korean naval craft. They fly along the DMZ. They shoot people in the DMZ, as they did during the famous tree incident and so forth. When we ignore them, they get really angry. There's a compensation for that now, though. The compensation is a treaty with Russia. So they're not so worried about us ignoring them now because they know they have the bomb. They know they have the deterrent. And oh, by the way, listen to Petey Hegseth talk about the Al-Ansar, the Houthis, talk about Iran, talk about they'll never have a ballistic missile. We will stop them. We will prevent them. Petey, have you looked the other direction lately? North Korea has ballistic missiles that will reach California, that will reach the Midlands in the United States, that will reach New York City. And it has developed the warheads to put atop those missiles. It has tested those missiles. We know that for a fact. You're worried about Iran? When out there is North Korea, will shoot Japan any moment. Japan's worried about that. Shoot California at any moment. Why aren't you attacking North Korea? Why aren't you presenting these ultimata to North Korea? You're presenting them to the Ayatollah in Tehran. Makes no sense. That's because these are rank amateurs. They're rank amateurs. They don't know what they're talking about half the time. They never study history. They never study the countries about whom they're talking. They just mouth off. Yesterday or day before yesterday, in that famous interview, Hegseth said that Trump was the most dependable, senior, great president America had ever had. Well, Petey, ever hear about George Washington? Ever hear about Abraham Lincoln? Ever hear about Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Petey, you need to do a little history. You need to research. Don't open your mouth until you've read a book other than your own.
So
this is an administration of amateurs. And the scandal over the signals leak is just a perfect example of it.
That's a good point. And I want to get back to Ukraine for a moment, but I want to dig into this also. I'm fascinated by this. They have, for one, Hegseth is lying through his teeth. Mike Waltz is trying to imply that the journalist somehow broke into the Signal account, which, again, all of this stuff is kind of outrageous, right? You were in office. You were in the Office of Secretary of Defense. How did you guys typically communicate? I mean, they were effectively using Signal as an application. What were you guys using when you were communicating back and forth?
Well, first of all, you have to realize, I think, it's hard to tell from some of the things they say, but I think this was a meeting of the principals, which is the level right below the statutory National Security Council. Usually consists of everybody but the president or whomever you want to limit it to. In this case, it was called a principal small group. So that usually is run by the National Security Advisor or the Vice President. Dick Cheney used to run it all the time in our administration. National Security Advisor Condi Rice didn't run it. Dick Cheney ran it. And usually it's the Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and Secretary of Defense, and maybe a couple of other people. It's a small group of the principals who are supposed to meet and tee up for the full principals or even bypass them and go up to the National Security Council staff where the president sits and makes a decision. So that's the decision-making process. Below that is the Deputies Committee and so forth. This is sort of an intermediate committee, and it's a small group of them. So they had absolutely no business using this technology, no business. When we were working in the principals and above, in fact, even in the Deputies Committee, There was no communication that wasn't secure, none whatsoever. And there was no one invited in who wasn't subject to the security classification of that particular meeting. And this argument that, as Pete Hegseth has made, that operational details aren't classified, that is total hogwash. He's lying through his teeth, or he's ignorant, because operational details don't need a top secret code word stamp on top of them. They have the stamp of "this will endanger the lives of America's warriors if the information gets out." That used to be, with Powell, that was sacrosanct. You did not reveal it. We stopped operations several times when he was chairman. We stopped operations because we thought there had been a leak of operational data, and we didn't want to endanger the troops. Didn't matter if it was stamped with a classification. It was operational data, which is precisely what this was. So all the arguments that they've been making before the Congress and in the press and everywhere else about it not being classified is just bull, total bull. It's the highest degree of protected information is what the troops are going to do being revealed to the enemy. So let's put that aside for a second. That's the reality of it. Second, the fact that Goldberg was invited in, even inadvertently, and at the end, people knew he was there. I'm convinced of that. They knew he was there at the end. It's just unconscionable. And Jeffrey Goldberg, who was an IDF soldier, an IDF prison guard, is a dual citizen, has dual responsibilities and loyalties. And I'll tell you this, my experience with these kinds of people in and around the government or journalism or whatever is their first loyalties to Israel. So Jeffrey Goldberg should have, the moment he got through that puzzle period where he thought it was all a hoax, if you believe his interviews, the moment he got through that and realized what he had his hands on, should have picked up the phone and called someone on the NSC staff, preferably Waltz himself, and said, "Do you know you leaked operational data? And I might not be the only one who has it. And the means you're using is insecure. And you should stop this operation because it might compromise the troops. You should postpone it. You should change it, whatever." He didn't do that because he was thinking he would have a journalistic coup and he would be back in the news again. And he also thought it would protect Israel. Now, I don't know this, but I will say it. Douglas Feith's son is a member of the National Security Council staff. Douglas Feith of the Mossad in his office every day during the Second Iraq War. Douglas Feith of the book Deadly Betrayal by Dennis Fritz, Command Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. It's out there right now. Anybody can read it. Tells you how Mossad ran the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy's office. Douglas Feith, a dual citizen also, whose loyalty is primarily to Israel. Douglas Feith, in my view, is a traitor. I don't know about his son. I don't know what his son is like, but Jeffrey Goldberg probably knows him. So what are we doing here? What are we doing with the NSC staff? Did he know about this? Did he understand that this was happening and protect Jeffrey so he could get his coup in the Atlantic? I don't know, but this is a mess. This is a mess, and it's most indicative. It didn't hurt anyone, thank God, except the Houthis, and maybe not even the Houthis. It hurt. You see Pepe Escobar standing in front of a home in Sana'a 2 days ago. Pepe's over there, and he's interviewing people, and the home is almost destroyed. And the people killed inside were women and children. They weren't Al-Ansar. They weren't Houthis. It was just a residential home around Sana'a, and a bomb hit it. That's how we do things. That's how our precise intelligence operates. Our precise munitions, Jamal, are no better than the intelligence that informs them. And the intelligence that informs them is kind of like that intelligence that said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. In other words, about 50% of the time it's wrong. So if your target is not the target intelligence is telling you, and you've got a 99% possibility of hitting it, and that's pretty much what it is, doesn't do you any good that you have precision munitions. You just killed a bunch of civilians because your intelligence was bad. And we don't realize that. We don't understand that. We don't put that into our calculations. So we're killing innocent people over there. We've been killing innocent people in Yemen for a long time, ever since we started supporting the Saudis and giving them intelligence. The Pentagon's excuse for giving the Saudis bombing intelligence, this is what they said years ago when we got legislation in the Congress to try to stop this. We are giving them the intelligence so they won't bomb civilians. Well, they went right on bombing civilians. You may recall they hit a school bus and killed, I think, 48 children in that school bus. And afterwards, someone went out and looked in the remains of the school bus and found a bomb casing. And on it said Raytheon.
Yep.
So that's how precise our munitions are, given the intelligence being bad. The munitions hit the target, but the target isn't what the intelligence said it was. So
just be clear, though, this is something
that again indicates how amateur think about Waltz's national security advisor. He was a congressman in Florida just a short time ago. What does he know about national security? What does Pete Hegseth know about national security at the level he's at?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. What about Hegseth? I mean, he's running the Department of Defense, and he was on TV like a month ago. Give or take. And I mean, on TV as a figure, as a character. And now he's running the Department of Defense.
Yes.
I don't know what any of these people have.
What he was running before was a Fox News show.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a TV character 2 months ago. And now he's running the Department of Defense, making military decisions. And what's interesting is in the write-up, like listening to people like J.D. Vance, I think Vance is right. Vance was like, why are we doing this?
Yes.
We're like, the argument that I made was effectively Trump's going to look like Joe Biden, impotent. Like he's going to go on this bombing raid. The Houthis are not going to stop, and they're going to continue to attack ships in the Red Sea. And it's like, what are you going to do after you finish your bombing and it didn't work? Like, whereas negotiation is the pathway to end it. They're very clear, we're doing this because you guys are committing genocide in Israel. If you stick to the deal, we stop.
Yes.
Trump doesn't want to do that. Like the man who got in saying, I'm going to make deals or I'm going to end wars, not start them, has just started a war.
It's, as I said, again, it's a very amateurish approach to U.S. foreign and security policy, and it's a dangerous approach because of that. And the words that Hegseth uttered about Iran were unconscionable. They show me that he's never read a book about Iran. He doesn't have a clue about Iran. He says, for example, that we're going to bring Iran back into the world of nations as a responsible power and so forth. Well, let's just parse that a moment. First of all, this is a society that had the most powerful empire in the world for a long period of time that Hegseth obviously knows nothing about. And it's today 90 million people with incredible terrain that would be almost impossible to attack across. It's a nation state, just like we are. And he's saying he's going to bring them back into the world. Now, I'm in Iran, and I'm looking at the nation state we call ourselves. We had a compact with Iran, with Germany, with the Perm 5, China, Russia, and the others. And Trump backed out of that compact.
Right.
He broke that compact. That had the force of international law. It was, in fact, a treaty. Iran doesn't care if the Senate ratified it or not. The President of the United States agreed to it. That's what Iran thinks of us now. Don't talk about Petey, don't talk about what we think of Iran. Let's crawl into our enemy's head and let's see what they think about us. They think we're duplicitous. They think all we have to do is change our leaders and our policy changes with it. They think they don't want to do business with us, and I wouldn't blame them a bit for thinking that way. Now, let me fast forward and say that I think Trump has the possibility, because of the circumstances, of coaxing the Iranians, if he does it properly, into a new nuclear agreement. Because I think they are so eager to get the sanctions lifted off of them, which is our main tool of diplomacy these days, that they would be amenable to coming into negotiations and maybe even to having a pretty good deal again. But then they've got to think, and I'm sure Javad Zarif, the vice president, who was very instrumental to the JCPOA in the first place, is thinking this and advising the Ayatollah accordingly, and the new president, he's not new anymore, accordingly. And that is, can we trust them? Can we trust them? When we get a new president, will he back out of the agreement that Trump makes? Trump wants this agreement so he can get a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what he wants. He lusts to compare himself with that black U.S. president named Barack Obama. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He's furious that the only black president in the United States got a Nobel Peace Prize. That's motivating him. But I don't care what's motivating him if he does, in fact, effect an agreement and we don't use military force against Iran, because, Jamal, if we use military force against Iran, the empire will begin to unravel twice as fast as it already is unraveling, because we can't beat Iran.
That's the rub, right? Pezeshkian wants a deal. I mean, he came out publicly for a deal. The Ayatollah came out and said, we're not going to negotiate under threat, which I don't blame him. How can I honestly negotiate with you if you are effectively threatening me to force me into a negotiation? It's impossible to negotiate under those terms for a sovereign nation. But they want a deal. It's like, I have a car that I want to sell you. It's a blue car, and you're in the market for a blue car. And then you turn around and say, negotiate with me for this blue car, or else I'll punch you in the face. And I'm like, dude, I want the blue car. You don't have to hit me in the face. Just sell me the car. Like, it is the weirdest negotiating tactic in the world. And it seems to be done purely for the sake of posturing, as opposed to just entering into some kind of negotiations in a similar way that they're entering in negotiations with Russia. I think the difference is Russia beat us in the war. Iran hasn't. And so we've given Russia a certain amount of respect because they were able to do it at the barrel of a gun. Iran has gone through no such war with us, and we apparently don't think much of them in the way that Trump is engaging them. It's unfortunate. It really is. It is bizarre in the way that Donald Trump operates in this way. But I want to get back to Ukraine real quick, because I do want to, before you leave, I definitely want to get your take on this. You have somewhat of a cynical view of this. Now, they have made a breakthrough, or do you consider that a breakthrough in regards to the deal? And by the way, you're not the only one with a cynical point of view on this thing, and I'm not saying cynical as a negative. Let's say clear-eyed view of it. Zelensky is going to be a problem. Europe is going to be a problem. Ukraine, at the very least, the neo-Nazi right-wing hardcore government and the structures that are in Ukraine are going to be a problem. Do you think that a president that is motivated can overcome those challenges?
I think he's motivated, and he's motivated by a number of things, not least of which is that peace treaty getting him the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, what if he pulled off a coup like one in Ukraine and one in the Southwest Asia with the Iranians too?
Yeah.
That'd definitely mean a peace prize. But I don't think his modus operandi and the people around him, their ignorance, basically. And I don't say that pejoratively or derisively. They just don't read. They don't understand history. Most of them are sort of infected with the businessman's philosophy. And businessman's philosophy is not diplomatic. Businessman's philosophy is profit, 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 profit. And diplomacy often doesn't give you profit. It gives you lose-lose. It gives you the world is saved once again. It gives you no war, peace once again. It gives you equilibrium once again. It doesn't give you profit. On occasion, it gives you profit. Let me give you a perfect example. In 2001, a U.S. EP-3 reconnaissance plane collided with a Chinese fighter, F-8 fighter. The fighter went down in the South China Sea, and the fighter pilot died. One of China's best aces died. The EP-3 was so badly damaged it had to land on Hainan Island, one of the most militarized portions of China. Crisis. Colin Powell gets on the phone. He contacts the Chinese traveling party, which then was in South America. Gets Chen Chi-chen, who knew the United States better than any other Chinese. Wang Yi is his replacement now, and probably the equivalent of Chen Chi-chen. And they talk about it, and they solve the crisis. How did they solve the crisis? They solved it by the fact that each issued an apology in the other's language. Isn't that neat? No one was hurt other than the pilot who was killed. We got our plane back. The crisis was settled. No one won, but both sides won in terms of diplomacy and in terms of the world. We didn't go to war with one another. That's diplomacy. It's not business. And these are all businessmen for the most part. And they bring that kind of attitude to what they're doing that is supposed to be diplomacy. And they also bring a colossal ignorance of the world and the nations in the world and the people with whom they're dealing. So this is not just amateur hour, it's also dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. There's not an adult in the entire crowd, except maybe, and I'm getting to believe this more and more. I have to kick myself every now and then when I do get to believe it more and more, except maybe J.D. Vance.
Yes,
J.D.
agreed.
Vance actually seems to know what he's doing.
Agreed. It's it's funny. I opened the show saying I'm growing. JD Vance is growing on me. Like just reading what he was saying in the meeting, where he was like, "This is a bad idea. Why are we doing this? Doesn't make sense." Like he legitimately seems to be more on the why are we in these wars, in a way that many of the other people around Trump just aren't. It's fascinating. And I thought Vance was a weak link when Vance was chosen as VP. Trump seems to have picked somebody who, at the very least, has a similar mindset on these foreign policy issues, kind of, I suppose. Okay, I accept your premise.
I'll say one more thing about J.D.
Please.
Vance. I do think that the saner heads in the Republican Party are looking at him as the candidate next time around, if we don't have a coup.
Yeah, agreed. Look, I think he's going to be a formidable challenge if he runs in 2028. He knows his stuff. He seems to be aware of the issues associated with the foreign policy in Ukraine, in the Red Sea. I mean, he knew 3% of his shipping went through. I had no idea that it was only 3% from the standpoint of America, meaning he has the premise of America first. He seems to be clear on. I don't know. He's an interesting figure. I guess we'll see more of him as time goes through. And he's Trump's pitbull.
And he's more or less, I've been a Republican for 50 years, longer actually. He's more or less a typical foreign policy, security policy Republican from the old days, modernized a bit. His remarks about Europe, I could have heard them come out of any number of senators, representatives' mouths back when we were putting NATO together. It was a close run thing. Dean Acheson, got my names mixed up there. Dean Acheson, who was Truman's main man on getting NATO going. Most of the appropriations that Truman approved, going from $8 billion, doesn't that sound like something unbelievable? An $8 billion budget to a $50 billion budget overnight were supposedly because the Koreans had invaded South Korea, the North Koreans. Really, all that money went to NATO. Korean War was fought on a shoestring. Most of that money that was massively appropriated for war, Dean Acheson and Harry Truman engineered going to NATO, because it was a very close run thing. And most of the reason was because of Republicans like J.D. Vance, who didn't think that being entangled in foreign alliances, where have we heard that before? Wasn't that George Washington?
George Washington, that's right.
Republicans didn't think that was a good thing to do. They didn't want to be bound to anybody in the world with America's might. They wanted to husband that might and defend America, not be bound to other people. Well, we can argue about the principles of that and the sanity of that and so forth. But nonetheless, this is a standard strain of Republican thought from Taft on down. And J.D. Vance is bringing it back. Look at the remarks he made about the Europeans. Look at the remarks he made to their face at the Munich Security Conference.
Yeah.
He is the old line Republican.
Let me ask you something. Donald Trump, they were able to get a black grain deal. Kind of. Russia has effectively said, look, we don't trust you. We don't trust anybody anymore. This needs to be ironclad. We need assurances. We need technical details. I haven't seen the technical details, and I'm super curious on what those are, because that's going to be, that's the main thing in order for the grain deal to work. Russia pulled out of it last time because Ukraine was effectively shipping weapons when they were supposed to be shipping grain. Also, the U.S. didn't live up to its own obligations associated with allowing its own exports to go through. This time around, with the new president, the belief is that this president will see to it, pay more attention to it, and attend to the Russian side of it. Trump has said that he's thinking about releasing sanctions. That is going to be a prerequisite in order for the grain deal to go through in the way that it's supposed to operate. You don't see that as progress, or not so much?
I don't know what the details are. I don't know what the plan is. What should have happened is you would have all the meetings necessary. You would make the initial decisions, maybe tee them up in the principals committee, and then push them into the statutory NSC, and then have the president decide A, yes, B, no, C, yes, D, and so forth. Then you would ship it out to the bureaucracy, which they're eviscerating with Elon Musk. You would send it out to the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy would say, that's not a derisive term. That's a description of the people who do the day-to-day business of American government. You'd ship it out there, principally to defense and state. And I don't know who would be the lead on this. State should be the lead. Usually you put one of the cabinet officers in charge of this planning. I would think Rubio would be in charge, but I would hope he would be in charge rather than Hegseth, and Hegseth would be his sort of deputy. And then they would farm it out, and everyone would come up with the details, just as you said. What are we going to do about a ceasefire? How are we going to suggest a ceasefire? How's this going to be implemented? Who's going to protect it? How are we going to do this follow on? How are we going to make sure the sanctions are lifted in a way that Putin receives and accepts, and yet in a way that they could snap back if they need to, if something happens? All of this would be put together, and the president would take all of this in a digested form, 3x5 cards, whatever, and some experts with him. And I'm going to take the national security advisor. It's not necessarily an expert, but you would take people with you, and you go to the meeting in Moscow or wherever it is, and you would present your plan. And Putin would accept that plan, delete that plan in certain they would massage that plan. That's diplomacy. You don't expect everything to be accepted, and you don't expect everything that Putin offers to be accepted, but you work out a compromise, and then you come away from it, and you let the working parties form beneath you, Russian and Ukrainian and U.S. and perhaps NATO, although I'm not sure I'd even let them in. I feel like J.D. Vance about that, because they're trying to screw the pooch. Every day they're trying to screw the pooch. And then you work it out. And maybe in 6 months, you'd have a complete solution for the problem. And the Ukrainians would start right away trying to disturb it. I guarantee you. I know the Ukrainians. I know the
Ukrainians. Doing it now.
Yeah.
They're doing it as we speak. I mean, they violated the ceasefire, almost as just a insult to Trump, immediately hitting the energy sector.
That's their nature. That's their nature. I worked with them in 2002, 3, and 4, and that's their nature. They are just short of. We used to call North Korea a criminal state. That's when they were counterfeiting our money to the tune of about $20 billion a year. And we had a special working group trying to combat that. We used to call them a criminal state. The Kim dynasty was like the mafia sitting on top of North Korea. Yeah. Well, when Powell put me into the Ukraine portfolio, one of the first things I said to him after studying it for a while was, hey, this is another North Korea. This is a criminal state. That's how they work. They're a criminal state. So you're going to be dealing with that kind of a state when you're trying to enforce this peace agreement, whatever it looks like.
That leads to a few questions. The fact that Europe is, as you pointed out, trying to screw this deal up entirely. I mean, Lavrov, speaking of diplomats, gave an interview, I believe it was Channel One, and he expounded on the things and the details that were taking place in the meeting. And one of the things that he pointed out was, look, Europe is doing everything in their power to destroy any negotiations that take place between the United States and Russia. For one, it's bilateral negotiation. We are talking with Russia, in which case we will dictate to Ukraine what takes place. Okay, dictate sounds nice, but that's assuming that they're obedient and that they listen to what they're being dictated. Lavrov said the only thing that will work is the United States giving them an order. But as you pointed out, they violate every deal. I mean, the Minsk agreements were violated. I mean, they were fundamentally ignored. Istanbul agreements blown away. Blown away the moment that Boris Johnson gets in. And now you have a ceasefire, only 30 days. They violate it immediately. Sky News just reported that Russia shot down drones flying over the Black Sea the day after they come up with the Black Sea deal. So how does Trump get Europe and Ukraine in line? Because I get the sense that Trump doesn't care about Ukraine. I would not be shocked if Trump told Putin, just tell me what you want, and we'll figure out how to make that work. And a lot of this is a dance in order to get Europe and Ukraine on board. How does the president do that? Because up to this point, he doesn't seem to have an answer for it.
You've just detailed the challenge in many respects. And I think most Americans are ignorant of the fact that we made that challenge. From 2002, when I was in the government, through Biden in particular, we essentially either bought or paid for the governments that are in the main countries in Europe right now. We bought and paid for Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, who one of the first words out of his mouth was NATO is a defensive alliance. Oh, and we need to turn to China. How do those two things go together? NATO is a defensive alliance. We need to turn to China. But we bought these governments. We bought and paid for these governments, the CIA, NGOs operating with the CIA, some of them wittingly, some of them unwittingly. We bought and paid for the governments in Finland, in Norway, in Sweden, in France, in Germany. Here's the second problem. Most of these governments, because of that ascent to power with U.S. help, most of these governments don't represent their populations.
Right.
Friedrich Merz in Germany certainly doesn't represent the German people. He represents a segment of the German people, the segment that was affiliated with his previous job as CEO of BlackRock. Macron doesn't represent the French people. Starmer doesn't represent Great Britain. He may represent England. I'm thinking increasingly he does. They seem to have gone insane in England. And the English Parliament is powerful within the Great Britain Parliament, if you will. That's the reason Scotland wanted to leave, Wales and Northern Ireland. They don't agree with a lot of the things that the British Parliament does, the English Parliament does. They've got a problem with that. And we've almost got to wait these people out until the systems are reformed. Germany's system really needs reform because they haven't had a leader in a long time that was responsible to the majority of the German people. Just not because of the way the coalitions are put together and the way their elections work. That's a long time away, though. Meanwhile, J.D. Vance is doing what I think probably needs to be done. He's telling them to go pound sand. Yeah. And they can't pound sand with their own military for 10 or 15 years. I was doing a conference in Berlin day before yesterday, and we were Zooming. And I asked the question, I said, you know, the propensity to serve of American youth between the age of 18 and 24 is 9%. Have you checked Germans and French and others' propensity to serve? You can put all these fancy aircraft and drones and crap in the air. You can put it in the air all day long. You can't do that either, not for at least a decade because you haven't got the money or the factories or the manufacturers to do it. We're doing everything for you right now. You're going to take 10 years to do that. But in the meantime, what's the greatest efficiency in Ukraine right now? What's the greatest efficiency? Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, described it. They don't have enough men. They don't have enough people to put on the front lines. Germany, France. Is your youth any different from American youth? Do they have a high propensity to serve when you conscript them? Or are they going to go like ours are going to go to Canada or Mexico if we introduce a draft? That's a huge question. So JD's got the right approach. You just stiff arm them. They haven't got the capacity ultimately to do much to mess you up. So you stiff arm them. And when they do make moves to mess you up, you give them retribution and you teach them a lesson. And maybe they might grow up and form a new security architecture for Europe that includes Russia, especially if you have effected a rapprochement between Washington and Moscow. And Sergei Lavrov talks about this from time to time. Putin talks about it too from time to time. But I think both of those individuals have become so distrustful of the deceitful American empire that it's very difficult for them to imagine a future of that sort of relationship. And that's a sad thing because we both have nuclear weapons.
When you say retribution, what does that mean? I know what the word means. So exactly what does it mean in practice?
What's that?
What does retribution mean in this context in regards to effectively putting the screws to Europe?
Retribution?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I use that term, I probably shouldn't have.
No, it's okay. Look, I agree with the term.
Because it's retribution to us, really, because we put these governments in power. We conjured these governments into power, just like we conjured Jens Stoltenberg into power and his replacement into power, who's worse than he. I mean, you've listened to him lately? He's worse than Stoltenberg. He wants to take on the world with NATO. I'm sorry, dude. Your job is very short-lived. All those generals and admirals that you manufactured in Brussels, they don't command a thing. They're just wearing the paraphernalia. They're just generals and admirals because they felt they had to match us in terms of generals and admirals. And we have way too many generals and admirals ourselves. But that's what NATO's trying to protect. They're trying to protect all that structure, all that money flowing in, all that camaraderie that they have in Brussels. And Brussels is isolated. They need to take a hike out somewhere and smell the winds. This is a different world, a very different world. You are right, Macron. You are right, Merz. You were right, Stoltenberg, that the power is eking out of the West and being drawn into the East. I've said this so many times. 1 in 5 people in the world is Chinese. 1 in 5 is Indian. 3 in 5 are Asian. And I said that the other day, and the guy looked at me, and he was right. And he said, throw the Africans in, and 4 out of 5 of the world's citizens do not come from our hemisphere. Where do you think the power's going? Where do you think the money's going? Where do you think the commerce is going? Where do you think everything is going? And the empire is trying to fight that tooth and nail, and it's losing when it should be trying to accommodate this. We've got challenges like nuclear weapons with no treaties, the climate crisis, which Trump seems to think is a hoax and is implementing policies along those lines, dangerous policies. We've got things to do in the world that are bigger than the United States, bigger than the American empire. And yet we're trying to protect that imperial writ with everything we have. We're killing people. Netanyahu's killing people on our dime. And we're messing everything up that could possibly happen that would be beneficial for the world's population and accommodating this shift to a multipolar world. People say multipolar. I say multinodal world. Charles Freeman, Ambassador Freeman, kind of taught me that term because I think he's right. Poles are like this, you know. How do you sit on top of a pole? How do you operate around a pole? It's a multinodal world. It's all connected. But there's no question that the major power, financial, economic, intelligence, military, you name the element of national power, that power is slowly creeping toward the east, with China as the formidable magnet pulling it. We've got to accommodate that. We are not the world's hegemon. We will not be the world's hegemon ever. I'm not sure we ever were, but we certainly are now. We need to work with those who have power similar to ours in the world, principally the BRICS, and inside that, China, Russia, India, and meet these challenges that none of us can meet alone. Economic crisis and nuclear weapons.
Ironically, and you may disagree with this, it seems that Trump is trying to do that. He's just doing it.
I wouldn't disagree with you. I wouldn't disagree with you.
Because it seems like he's come to an assessment that, okay, we're no longer a hegemon, which means we need to deal in spheres of influence. Russia, who just won that war, is going to be a sphere. China is going to be a sphere. Europe has no hard power, so they don't matter. And we need our American empire. And we need to reorganize the way trade flows. We need to reorganize our relationships. Like, it seems that he's come to this assessment, but he's trying to work through it from a position of strength. And because Donald Trump is a strong man in the way that he considers himself, every negotiation comes from, it must be done from a position of strength with the U.S. as a hegemon. But he is not. That's not an anomaly. I mean, even Joe Biden behaved that way. And Joe Biden was the worst, I would argue, president we've ever had. I mean, when he's standing there with Schultz,
bingo.
When he says, we're going to blow up the pipeline, and Schultz just stands there. It's a German-Russian pipeline, and Schultz has nothing to say about the fact that the American president just said, I'm going to blow up the pipeline. Or Root, when Trump brings him in, and he's like, we're going to take Greenland. Okay, well, here's a British, head of NATO with Trump effectively saying we're going to take NATO territory. And he has nothing, like he can't even give a rejection to Donald Trump saying it. Like, we always function that way from that position of strength. It's like the Brits, they still act like they're masters of the world. We've taken on this imperial mantle of sorts. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. That seems to be the way that he's trying to check. Look, I think he's going to fail because I think the globalization thing is that horses ran. I think China's out the barn. Russia is already a power, meaning these are forces that Donald Trump seemingly is trying to somehow change the stream of the river or the direction of the stream. But it seems that he is responding to something that is real in a way that Joe Biden just wouldn't accept. And so he kept plugging away at the war. Correct me if I'm wrong, and this could be the last question because we're coming to the hour and I don't want to keep you for too long. I appreciate your visiting me.
I think you're right about the Biden administration. I think they misread the world completely. I think they were trying to hold on to a hegemony that, one, we never had, and two, that we certainly don't need, and it would be too costly in blood and treasure for the American people to maintain anyway, and a failure at the end. Mm-hmm. That was the last vestige of international liberalism, if you will, almost messianic. And it was almost messianic with Joe Biden and his age. And I can testify to this. I'm 80 years old. His age made it more and more messianic as he went along because he saw his legacy in tatters creeping away from him. Yeah. And he couldn't handle that. And so he wanted to just double down and triple down on the existing strategy, which was a tragic mistake. Trump, I don't think understands all of that, except maybe intuitively. I don't think intellectually he understands it. He's not well read, and he doesn't understand the history of empire, for example. He doesn't understand that there have been hundreds of empires in the world, and they're all gone. He doesn't understand that there were empires in the world that were every bit as powerful as we are now in their own ways, except for one factor. No empire in human history, of the hundreds that there have been, has ever had the technological means to destroy the human race. Yeah. None. We invented it in 1945. We even used it and killed 100 to 150,000 human beings in a flash, just like that, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're possessed of that. We are going to disappear too, Jamal. We are going to disappear. It's the history of empire. It doesn't mean we have to go away. Britain didn't go away after its empire faded and folded. Britain's still there. But it does mean we're going to have to adjust our approach to the world. But here's the kicker, and I keep pressing this with everyone I can. We have those means. And at the end, if we are losing so badly because of our flawed strategy, wherever it might be, in Iran, Russia, China, whatever, if we're losing badly, we'll go to nuclear weapons. And that is a denouement I hate to contemplate.
Do you think we're going to use nukes against Iran? I mean, Trump gave a 2-month deadline, which is insane to me.
Look at what Netanyahu is doing in Gaza and in Syria now, where he's killing people in Syria. He's taking more and more territory every day in Syria, yes, and we're authorizing that. He's almost taken Lebanon. Lebanon is a basket case. Jordan is a basket case. Egypt is becoming a basket case. Netanyahu could turn his guns in any direction at any time, and we would bless it. We would let him go ahead and do it. We'd fund it. We'd back him 100%. That's our idea of keeping chaos in Southwest Asia going, with the target ultimately being Iran. So the answer to your question, I think, is we will do almost anything to try and arrest this slippage of power away from the West toward the East. Donald Trump seems to have this intuition about this and seems sort of want to go back to J.D. Vance's traditional America, where we are a fortress America, where we don't really have. George Washington said he didn't like entangling alliances. Pretty good man to refer to. maybe this is a change. Maybe we're going to get out of these alliances. Maybe we're not going to try to be the defender of the world as we know it. And we got a long way to go to do that. We got Korea, Japan to shed. We got Europe to shed, which J.D. Vance seems to be in the process of orchestrating quite well. Thank you very much. But if it is that kind of thing, I can understand why you'd want Panama, and I understand why you'd want Greenland.
Yeah.
You'd want to divest Europe of Greenland. You'd want Greenland because it's so strategic, and you'd want the Panama Canal, even though they're building one in Nicaragua that's probably going to put it out of business, and the Chinese are backing that one. Still, if you're going to Fortress America, you don't have to call it Fortress America. You don't have to call it isolationism. You just say, I've only got the wherewithal to defend the Western Hemisphere, my friends and allies in the Western Hemisphere, and myself. That's all I have the wherewithal to do. And I realize that. If you do that and then you still work with the world to meet these challenges like climate change and nuclear weapons and such, and you still trade and do commerce, you're going to have to do that. And you quit sanctioning 1/4 of the world's people. That's right. We got 1/4 of 8 billion people under our sanctions right now. If you change all of that, and if Donald Trump intends on doing that, more power to him. Then you might make it through to a gentle glide slope off the imperial, train you've been on all along. And you might wind up being even better than Britain at the end of its empire. You might still be a near peer power in a world of near peer powers, in a world that's working on its main challenges, which are possession of nuclear weapons, always dangerous. And we're getting ready to build more and more of them, $2 trillion worth for us. And the climate crisis, which is going to, Jamal, it's going to eat our lunch if we're not careful. The fires in South Carolina right now, the fires that we had in California, those are just signs of what's to come. It's going to be much worse. When I said to a senator 10 years ago how bad this was going to be, and I gave him a RAND report showing how bad it was going to be, he looked at me and he said, we won't do anything until the water's at our neck.
Yes.
And I said, that'll be too late.
That's how we function, though. Like, it's so esoteric in comparison to and I'm using esoteric in the sense of this looming thing that's out there, that's not any one particular thing can be attributed to, and yet it can be. Like, it's a very weird challenge to me. I agree with you.
Trump actually has Republicans now pushing back on his abandonment of the infrastructure money that Biden voted in that is going to climate. Because they understand, these Republicans in the states understand that their states aren't going to be able to handle the changing climate without federal help. And they don't want that money to go away because it's created jobs. They got people in solar industries, people in wind industries and things like that with good jobs. So he's getting a lot of pushback from the states right now, including Texas.
That's ironic. Yeah,
that's
so funny. In Donald Trump's report, and I'll let you go. In Donald Trump's report, when he was in office first time around, climate change came up. And I think he said in X number of years, the temperature is going to rise by like 9 degrees, but we can't do anything about it anyway. So, let's just make the money. Just insane. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, thank you for this. I really do appreciate it. Lawrence Wilkerson, he's distinguished, well, I'll just say was distinguished visiting professor at the Government of Power.
Former,
thank you. Retired distinguishing visiting professor at government and public policy at the College of William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. He also taught for 6 years at the University Honors Program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. He is also, and probably best known as, retired United States Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff to United States Secretary of State Colin Powell. Thank you for this. By the way, where can people find you? Just so people can find your work.
They can email me still on the William & Mary email, lbwilk@wm.edu. It's on the William & Mary website.
There it is. You have a good one. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me on.
Oh, man, always. Have a good one. He is so right. God, I appreciate him. Look, Trump, I agree with him. I don't think Trump thinks about this stuff in, let's say, technical details, if that makes sense. I think he has a sense that takes him in a particular direction or another direction, which could be good or which could be bad. Looking at the world as multipolar on some level is an acknowledgement that the empire is degrading, because otherwise, why would you need to look at the world in multipolar terms, if that makes sense? No, it's a fascinating conversation. I appreciate him for joining me. Let me go to my next guest, my man, Ted Rawl.
Hey,
Ted Rawl, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI that starts at 10 a.m. with the beautiful, the great, the one and only, the magnificent, fantastic Manila Chan. What's going on, Ted? How you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you, Jamal?
I am doing good. Better that you are with me. There's a few stories I want to hit with you, and some of them I'm fascinated by. One, I have to start here. Trump's approval rating. Trump's approval rating. And I want your take on this. So this is CNN giving somewhat of a surprise report that they may not actually want to give, but they're giving it anyway.
It's important to do a little bit of reality check and take a little different spin at the numbers. I'm going to do that right here because all we talk about is how unpopular Donald Trump is. But in reality, he's basically more popular than any point in term number one, and more popular than he was when he won election back in November of 2024. What are we talking about? His net favorable rating right now comes in at -4 points. Compare that to where he was when he won in November of 2024, when he was at -7 points, or March of 2017, when he was at -10 points. So when you compare Trump against himself, he's actually closer to the apex than he is to the bottom of the trough. And of course, that's so important because Donald Trump, historically speaking, has had his numbers underestimated. So I think it's very important to compare him to himself to understand he's actually more popular now than he was when he won, or.
So despite everything that Donald Trump is doing, apparently he is more popular now than first term. And he's at the apex of his popularity now, even though he's slightly underwater. What are we to make of this?
Well, it's interesting that there's really any movement at all, right? Because sort of the general feeling was that everybody had solidified their opinion about Donald Trump. He's been center of our politics really for 9 years. Not really throughout the Biden years. Political talk was more about the guy who wasn't president than the guy who was president. And so, I mean, it's hard to believe that there's even any movement. We can only speculate unless we, get a deeper dive into these numbers and to try to get granular. But my suspicion here, and by the way, it's not unprecedented for a president to have a higher approval rating after they become president than when they were elected. That happened for Obama. Obama had basically a 60% approval rating when he was inaugurated, but he didn't get 60% of the popular vote. So it can happen. My suspicion here is that this is not because of what Trump is doing. It's because of the fact that he is doing a lot of things. There's a general sense in most presidential elections where there's a lot of promises and then there's not very much delivery or even really much attempt to deliver after inauguration. I mean, for better or for worse, and there's definitely a lot of for worse. Donald Trump has been a busy little boy, and he's been up to a lot. And so, there's been I don't need to enumerate, but the point is he's been very busy. There hasn't been a day in the news where Trump didn't do something dramatic, often 2 or 3 things that were dramatic. So I think this is a core feature of this presidency is highly activist, a lot of motion, a lot of action. And that's something I think, American voters who were really, over the last 4 years, for example, it wasn't like that, right?
Yeah.
So people, I think that's what this is about. But obviously it could be something different entirely. I suspect those numbers are going to change as the economy seems to be slowing down. Consumer confidence numbers just came out. Those are kind of startling. They're the lowest since the beginning of the Biden administration, January 2021.
Mhm.
That doesn't bode well. That was in the middle of a pandemic. We weren't feeling good about ourselves at that time, so we're not feeling people are going to be ramping back their consumer purchases. That's going to have an effect. AI is already killing some jobs. And we're due for a recession. So I don't know how bad it'll be, but I think we will see a downturn in the next year probably.
I agree with everything you just said, Ted. You're absolutely right. And I want to add something else to it. When people voted for Trump, I think they mostly voted for the economic boom. Like me, I think it was a few things. One, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is not really offering anything. These two are one-to-one. Kamala Harris couldn't distinguish herself from Joe Biden. Joe Biden wouldn't let her distinguish herself from Joe Biden. If you remember that meeting where Joe Biden was like, "No daylight, kid." And I love that line. That's so Joe Biden, right? Even the kid part it's intimate, but intimate in a way that's manipulative. It's like, look, I need you to be a one-to-one with me, protect my legacy, protect what I'm doing in this administration. Even if you lose, you need to protect this legacy. Okay, well, fair enough. She did that and she lost. I think what they voted for Trump for was, we want economic relief. We believe you'll be a better steward of the economy. We want you to end the war. Like, I think it was in those terms, not to destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, to fire all these federal workers, to go into a tariff war. I don't think they planned on that. But to your point, it looks like he's doing something. He's frenetic. He's being busy, even if he's doing stuff that you don't particularly like. This conversation took place. I was fascinated by it. My ex sent it to me because she wanted my take. And I was like, I'm going to use this video. She's like, oh my God, you're going to use the video? Yes, I'm going to use the video. It's a great video. Listen to the clash that takes place between Carol Levitt and the reporter who's asking a question that I have asked many a time. And I think many Americans are also asking.
Addressed the BRT when he was on the campaign trail. His big push was on tax cuts. He's going there today as he's proposing tax hikes in the form of tariffs.
Not
and
true.
I'm curious
He's not doing
why
that.
he's prioritizing that over the tax cuts.
He's actually not implementing tax hikes. Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that, again, have been ripping us off. Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people. And the president is a staunch advocate of tax cuts. As you know, he campaigned on no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, no taxes on Social Security benefits. He is committed to all three of those things, and he expects Congress to pass them later this year.
I'm sorry, have you ever paid a tariff? Because I have.
That's
They
it.
don't get charged on foreign companies. They get charged on the importers.
And ultimately, when we have fair and balanced trade, which the American people have not seen in decades, as I said at the beginning, revenues will stay here, wages will go up, and our country will be made wealthy again. And I think it's insulting that you are trying to test my knowledge of economics and the decisions that this president has made.
Okay, it's not insulting. There's that. Especially since what she's saying, she's lying through her teeth. And in that statement, she admits that she's lying in an indirect way. When she makes this argument, yeah, tariffs, blah, 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 blah. And then at the very end, she says, ultimately, the American public will, be better off when we have higher wages, more jobs, etc. Okay, the ultimately is the tail, right? Because ultimately means that you're talking about in the end, meaning when everything is done, when everything is said, when everything is finished, we will be better off. But that also means that this is kind of a Boris Johnson answer, where Boris Johnson is talking about Brexit, Fortress Britain, all of this stuff, and then goes into a private meeting and somebody records Boris Johnson saying, oh, it's going to hurt. it's going to be painful for a decade. It's that. It's the ultimately that tells, okay, this is not something that is going to be pretty or great. And the numbers that you pointed to that's leading into a recession, it's what Trump is doing. And I think that is going to be something that is not necessarily going to be in the best interest of America, because I don't think all of these countries that Trump is having a trade war with is just going to accept the fact that Trump is having a trade war. It is very possible that those countries say, bring it, screw it. Sovereignty matters. Trump is not going to be able to change the global order. They wanted this globalism stuff. Now they're trying to protect. We're not going to accept it. So I could be wrong. Give me your take on this. I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into ultimately, but the reporter is right. The tariff is paid by the importer. We pay that. And the companies tend to change or up the price in order to make sure we pay it, not the country. Give me your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Look, I think this is an interesting topic for me because I grew up in the Rust Belt. I'm from Dayton, Ohio, which was a city that was absolutely devastated by globalization and deindustrialization. So I'm highly sympathetic to the argument in favor of protectionism of American jobs.
Yeah.
I really do think, I believe, that the first job of the American government is to protect American people, including American
Agreed.
workers. So I'm sympathetic to the tariff argument. I think the problem is the administration is kind of caught in a bind because they can't do tariffs and fight inflation and fight high prices, more to the point, at the same time.
Right.
And they know that. And the thing is, although I do think that producers of goods and services, they tend to, when there's higher costs like tariffs, they tend to try to absorb some of them to try to keep price points from not going much higher than like their competition. But still, they're going to pass a significant amount of it on to consumers. There's no way that, say, Chinese exporters are going to absorb all the costs of tariffs on Chinese goods imported into the United States. It'll be shared, and so prices. It will have there's no doubt tariffs have an inflationary effect. Maybe not as it's not 100%, but it's there. And so this is this is not what the president campaigned on. This is definitely a bait and switch, and I think that this president is a very canny. Has been a person who has been able to figure out the pulse of the American people, or at least, of the Republican voters. I don't know that. I think he's misreading things here. I think people were looking for immediate relief. I mean, it's so, like immediate in the form of not even reduced prices, but some kind of government subsidy, like the COVID paycheck payments. That would something like reviving that would be a smart move. You can't make prices lower. Then you go into a deflationary spiral. All you can do is try to keep inflation under control. The prices we've got now are baked in. They're going to keep ticking up. We just don't want them to tick up at the same rate that they were going up before. So and I think he's also not being good at communicating with the American people. I mean, people asked for action, but nobody understands what the hell is going on. I mean, he doesn't have a fireside chat type of message that explains, okay, so listen, I know I promised this, but here's, unfortunately, if I don't do these tariffs now, I don't know what kind of Congress I'll have next year. I've got to do it now. This is something that's really important. I'm asking you to support me. He doesn't have that communication strategy. Right. I think he's going to pay a price for this. I think it's going to be a problem. The issue is really both parties are going to be in trouble because the Democrats are, worthless right now, and so they can't pick up the pieces. But unfortunately for them and for us, but the Republicans are, they're going to pay. I mean, people are going to be pissed, and it's not going to take that long. Right now, look, it's March. The president took office just over 2 months ago. People, this is the honeymoon period. It's cool. But, in America, you get about 6 to 9 months. That's it. By this fall, winter, people can't afford as many Christmas gifts for their kids. They're going to start getting upset.
Yeah, I agree with you. I am sympathetic to Trump on this because I agree with you, right? Like, part of what he wants is to bring jobs back to America.
Yeah.
But you're trying to do that after 50 years of globalization. And I'm saying 50 years.
It's kind of too late.
Yeah. It's like, it feels like the horse is out the barn. And this notion of trying to we're trying to reach, we need to protect American business. We need to force companies to come back here because they're going to pay a price if they don't. As Richard Wolff pointed out, it is very expensive for a company to move, and there's going to be a new president in 3 years. So why would they do that? It's going to be something like that, right? And so I understand why he's doing it. I agree with you that he hasn't necessarily communicated to the American public. And to be honest, he's not the most coherent communicator anyway. So I don't know how that would work, even if he tried. JD Vance kind of communicated it, making the point of saying globalization went awry and we need to do something different. But I don't think America's going to care. I think what they're going to see is my prices have gone up. I put them in office in order to lower my prices, and things are more expensive. I think it's going to be that.
I think I honestly, Donald Trump is the oldest man to have ever served as president of the United States. And this is coming after a guy just had to withdraw as president, running for re-election because he was too old, right? Well, Trump got elected older than that guy. So Trump's an old dude. Yeah. And I think he's just like, he's stuck in the narratives of the past. He's obsessed with what went wrong in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Fair enough. I'm obsessed with what went wrong in the 80s, 90s, and aughts. I get it. But it's like not, if you're really summarizing the issue here, the real issue is, and I know you'll like this analogy, it's a Star Trek analogy. So, in several episodes of the original series, they land on a planet where it's like, oh, well, you don't have jobs. No, we don't work anymore. We achieved so much efficiency, and computers do everything for us now. So we just devote ourselves to pleasure and learning, and we just have a good time. And maybe it's a pleasure planet. Maybe we're all intellectuals. Whatever. The point is, whether you're having a lot of sex or reading a lot of books or both, the point is that you don't have to work anymore, but you still have money coming in. Okay, so, when I watched that as a kid, I remember just thinking, well, that's nirvana, right? That's utopia. Yeah. Well, even Elon Musk, before he got involved in all this mishigas, he was saying the same thing with AI. And we've seen this trend. Basically, the powers that be, the elites, they don't need us anymore to extract our surplus value. The surplus, the efficiencies created by AI and automation and robotics and all these other machines has gotten us to the point where the workforce can be smaller and you can still have a GDP that keeps increasing. We're looking at that as a problem because that means that we don't need as many workers. That's not a problem. That's an opportunity. And to get like one of those Star Trek planets, we should be aiming for that. We should start to be telling people either, well, we're going to a 20-hour work week, or, so we share it all, or we should detach. This is the smart move. Like, we don't, in the same way that healthcare doesn't need to be attached to work. That's why. It's like pay should not have to be attached to work. You should be, as a citizen of a wealthy country with an increasing GDP, who cares why it's raising? You should be like, like the people who lived in Alaska. Just for being Alaskan, they got pipeline money. Just for being American, you should get paid. And just so that you can pay your landlord and buy a car every now and then and go to the movies. That's what we need. That's the future. Elon Musk knows that. And that, it's Andrew Yang knows it. Forward-looking people know it. Donald Trump doesn't understand it. If he did, I think if he got behind it, if he could be made to understand that, we'd see something. The problem is that he's like, for whatever reason, nobody's like convinced him or explained this to him. He's hidebound to an old way that's doomed, because AI is, as long as you tell people you have to work in order to live, but then you tell them you can't work because there's no jobs, well, then you're telling people there's no hope for them, and the economy is going to fall apart.
Yes. Richard Nixon knew it. If you remember, Richard Nixon wanted to have a reverse income tax.
Yep.
I forget what the exact amount was, but basically, whatever you don't make up to that amount, the government sends you a check for it. I agree with you. This has been one of those things that I've always been, I can't say always, but over a decade, I've been fascinated by. Jack Fresco has the Venus Project. And his idea is to move forward with this idea of technical revolution of the world, effectively saying the world is a common resource. All of us own all of the resources of the planet. Like, how do you say that you own or don't own something? Nobody gave it to you. You had to take it by force of arms, most likely. And his thing was, look, we can revolutionize the planet. We are so built into this issue of survival that it is hard for us to see somebody not working. Like, it's just, it doesn't compute. And yet, at some point, as you pointed out, all of these Uber drivers are going to be fired. All of these truck drivers are going to be fired. Your checkout lines are going to get less and less to the point where you're going to be doing it in an automated sense. Many of the jobs are going to be eliminated that don't need to be there because AI is going to be able to do it. Okay, we're going to have to figure out as a society what to do about that, because when AI is doing the jobs, we're not going to get paid. And it's a social issue. It's not a technical issue, it's a social one. And I don't think we can wrap our heads around it yet, at least not at this point. I guess the pain hasn't been enough to do so. One of the things that they're talking about, though, is no tax on tips. If you notice, she said this is what the president wants: no tax on Social Security, no tax on tips. And even going further and saying, or not saying it, but they're in the middle of budget reconciliation as we speak. And Trump has pushed this idea of no tax on tips. I'm fascinated that this is coming out of a Republican. And maybe I shouldn't be. I mean, it is tax, but usually they just give themselves tax cuts, not the overwhelming majority of workers in the country a tax cut. And that tax cut could be $20,000, $30,000, depending upon the job. Give me your take on that, Ted. I mean, does that destroy the Democratic Party if they get that through and it's a Republican plan? Meaning, if you go to your bank account and you find, hey, I get to keep $20,000 for my YouTube money. Okay, that's a big deal. Or hey, I get to keep $30,000 for my waiter job because the overwhelming majority of money get our tips. That's a big deal. Does that destroy the Democratic Party?
I think the Democratic Party is destroyed by something bigger that this is a reflection of, which is that the Republican Party, again, this is the theme here, the Republican Party is moving, they're doing things, they're moving fast. Democrats are not promising anything. They're not coming up with any kind of agenda. I mean, could you tell me, I mean, no one could tell me, but Jamal, could you tell me if, we snap our fingers and tomorrow morning, there's a Democratic president, House, Senate, and Supreme Court. Can you tell me 3 things they're going to do in the next 6 months? I can't. And I can't tell you one. So, I mean, maybe just guarantee more aid to Ukraine. Probably that's about it. But what are they going to do? Nobody knows. So, I mean, the thing is, I actually think the no tax on tips thing is not as powerful as, for example, saying that the minimum wage for tip work should be at the same level as for non-tip work. There should be no such thing as a sub-minimum wage. That's nonsensical, right? I mean, what if you don't get tipped? What if people don't like the cut of your jib and you're a waiter? I mean, you don't get paid? That's ridiculous, right? So, only America has this strange system. So, where it's kind of like, well, you have to be like really, good at getting tips or something. So this is I don't think being charming should be a job requirement necessarily for living. But anyway, it's very, I think the fact that they have these ideas and the fact that, they're getting stuff done is really what is their superpower against the Democrats. And, I can't believe Democrats can't figure that out. It's like, you guys got to you got to do something for the people, right? Like, remember Kamala Harris's campaign slogan for like blink and you missed it, but it was like Kamala Harris for the people.
Yeah,
Get it? It's a double entendre. She was a prosecutor. Okay, but the point is, for the people is key, right? Like Donald Trump says he's doing things for the people. I mean, that's not always true. The tax cuts are not for the people, but still, he says it. And some of these things seem to ring true. Even like the nativism. the chasing down of of migrants, and even the stuff that I just can't stand, going after the Gaza protesters with green cards. It's framed as something that's protecting the American people. The Democrats can't even they can't even get the messaging together. Forget about the policy planks. It's kind of shocking, because it's like, you guys are a major political party, right? You were founded in 1824. You've been around for 200 years.
And a party on the left.
They didn't even, by the way, how interesting is that? They're so lame. They didn't even celebrate their 200th anniversary last year. They forgot to mention it.
Are you serious? That's so sad. It's a party on the left. And I'm going to let you go, but it's like, left-wing parties are supposed to be the political energy, right? I mean, the conservative party is, we want to keep things relatively the same. Tax cuts, okay, fair enough. We don't believe in government all that much. But the left-wing party is the party that's, we want Medicare for all. We want to do these big things. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of this stuff come out of the left. Civil rights, all of this stuff come out of the left. And they've gotten to a place where they're like, we don't, just complete shambles. It's Republicans came out with Project 2025, whatever you think about it, it's at the very least putting something out saying, this is what we want to do. These things are egregious, and yet they still put it out saying this is what we want to do. There's nothing like that. I agree.
Well, that's because for decades, Democrats their whole framing has been that we're here to protect the gains that we achieved in the distant past against the evil Republicans who are trying to cut them. And they just, that's basically where they got stuck. It's like,
but that's not the way to protect gains.
That's not, it's not good politics. I mean, yes, you protect what happened before, but the thing is, let's just say you're pushing to build on those previous gains, then exactly. It's already a given that those are baked in, and you don't have to protect them.
Exactly.
If you just play defense all the time, then they say that in politics, if you're playing defense, you're losing.
Right.
And that's what's been happening.
Ted Raw, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI, Too Much Information with Manila Chan, at 10 a.m. to 12 a.m. Monday through Friday. Check him out immediately after the show. Ted, where else can people find you? Did I get that right? I want to make sure that
you did. That's all correct. And also the DMZ America podcast with Scott Stantis on YouTube and Rumble. Just go to my website, rawl.com, and find my columns.
Why is that name familiar to me? Scott Stantis.
He's the political cartoonist at the Chicago Tribune. He's a conservative, and he and I have been doing this podcast for 4 years, where it's basically right versus left, but we're best friends. It's all very civilized.
That's super interesting. I didn't even know that. Oh God, I didn't even know it. Okay, fair enough. Check him out. Ted Raw. Thank you for this, Ted. I really appreciate it, man. Be safe.
Hang in there, Jamal.
I will do my damnedest. Have a good one. Shout out to Ted Raw. Before I go to my next guest, Mark is going to be here shortly. He was nice enough to come back and join me. Waltz. So he is implying that somebody broke into Signal. Like, this has become a mess. And I'm glad Colonel Wilkerson was able to explain it in those terms effectively. Like, this should have never happened. This is a clown show. How on earth do you have this high-level meeting? I mean, and again, I hadn't planned on talking to him about it, but I'm glad he brought it up. You are planning on attacking a country. Like, you're effectively having war plans. And you allow a journalist from the Atlantic that, for whatever particular reason, you're claiming you had no idea how he got there. He just strolled in. Oh, there's gambling in this establishment. Oh my God, there's somebody having sex on the table. I had no idea. And when it blows up, your response to it is to Hegseth lie, voraciously lie. And in Walt's case, imply that the journalist somehow broke in. It's just outrageous. For one, everybody pointed out that Hegseth was lying, even people within the context of the Trump administration. Waltz, I guess it's more clever, but it doesn't quite work because how does the journalist randomly get into your meeting? You're implying that he broke in somehow, that the journalist code broke your Signal account as if he was going to know that you were having a meeting. How was Jeffrey Goldberg going to know that you all are having a meeting at the time when you're having that meeting? You could have had that meeting at any time. How would he know in order to break into your Signal account to listen to the conversation? It makes no sense. They are lying over the top, lying in order to cover, as opposed to just say, we messed up. Our bad. We effed up. It's just the level of the screw up is the problem. You were in the middle of war plans that you, for whatever particular reason, couldn't keep secret. And if you couldn't keep the secret from Goldberg, who else knew about the war plans? Just astonishing. I have been looking forward to this conversation all day. Mark Sabotta, international relations security analyst, he was nice enough to come back on the show for a few minutes to discuss the deal that was, well, not signed, but the deal that was negotiated between Russia and the U.S. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Tomorrow, I'm alive. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always an honor and a pleasure to not see you.
Fair enough. I accept that. And I thank you for joining me when it's an honor and pleasure not to see you. I brought you on because I wanted to just get details on the deal that seemingly has been worked out. It seems well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Seems to be worked out. It seems they're trying to revive the grain deal. Lavrov and China One pointed out very clearly, look, we don't trust anybody at this point. We've been burned so many times. We need concrete details to be worked out before this comes into play, including sanction relief that allows our agricultural products to go through, the transactions to go through cheaper, to be re-added back to the SWIFT system in the context of these agricultural products. Am I getting this right so far? Also, this notion of not attacking ships on the Black Sea, which apparently has been violated already by Ukraine as they were flying drones over the Black Sea, as reported by Sky News. Have I said anything incorrect? Have I gotten this?
No. I think you got some of the general outlines correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the U.S. So what came out of this is the U.S. and Russia and the U.S. and Ukraine both have general agreement statements that they made, right? However, there is actual no new ceasefire in place, right? That we know of, right? Because nothing has been announced that this came into effect on this day. And the Russian side put out considerably more details. It has to, all three sides, if you will, even though the majority of these negotiations obviously did not involve the Kiev regime in Ukraine at all. Right. They didn't mention any of this. The U.S. mentioned it a bit, and Russia went into considerably more detail, although even with that, there are a lot of questions.
Yes.
And basically, this was something that is, in effect, shall we say, initialed by the two respective expert groups, right, that were meeting in Saudi Arabia. But then this will be taken back to their leaders, because particularly according to the Russian side, right, even the provisions about the non-use of force on the Black Sea, etc., only come into force after certain things. And these are Russia's conditions. And that involves lifting Russian sanctions from Roslholzbank, which is an agricultural bank in Russia, and other financial organizations involved in ensuring operations on international trade in food products, including fish products, Okay. And fertilizers, connecting them to SWIFT, opening
Right.
the necessary correspondent accounts, lifting restrictions on trade finance transactions. I don't know exactly what that means. That sounds rather all encompassing and sounds
That's
like
like,
it could be
okay.
beyond just the Black Sea, right? Also, lifting sanctions restrictions on companies producing and exporting food and fertilizers, as well as lifting restrictions on the work of insurance companies with food cargo and fertilizers, lifting restrictions on servicing ships in ports and sanctions against ships under the Russian flag involved in the trade of food products, lifting restrictions on the supply of agricultural machinery to the Russian Federation, as well as other goods used in the production of food. Right, so they're asking for quite substantial sanctions relief in order to pass this bill. Right, and some of the things, and particularly those involving the U.S. halting its measures to prevent Russia from gaining insurance from Western firms, I guess, in particular. Russia, of course, has their own firms and so forth, but the U.S. has been pursuing secondary sanctions against Russian shipping, what it calls Russia's shadow fleet, because it doesn't have control over them because they're not under Western insurance. So Russia's asking for a whole lot of financial, trade, shipping, and port sanctions to be removed. And we've heard from Trump. He made an aside when asked questions by journalists that he was looking into relieving sanctions on Russia to get the Black Sea Initiative through. So they're studying what the Russian conditions are. And that's where we are right now. So it's not like anything has been agreed on in a Black Sea deal. Ceasefire has gone into effect, but there obviously was substantial technical details worked out during those 12 hours. They were very mum, right? I don't know anyone who said, "Oh, they almost got something," right? That wasn't what anyone got. That they had they were very tight-lipped. Some of the words we heard were difficult but useful, and the American side saying that, well, we don't actually have to have a document or details coming out as long as we're talking to each other, right? So no one with those signals, said, "Oh my God, they've almost got." But then they released this afterwards. Now the Russians, some Russian officials have come forward and said that the reason there was no joint communique immediately following or press statement immediately following the expert group's meeting is because the Kiev regime refused, that they didn't agree to any of this, basically. And it has to be said that there's still so many. I mean, even if all these sanctions were removed to Russia's satisfaction, then there's this question. One of the provisions, of course, is the non-use of commercial vehicles for military purposes.
There.
Yeah.
No, please continue. I was just saying that was going to be a sticking point because beforehand, Ukraine was effectively shipping weapons.
So what the Ukraine has been doing is sending ships right out with grain, and when they come back in, they're carrying weapons. Right, this was happening, and the U.S. was obviously in on this, as well as the European Union. Turkey was supposed to be handling the inspections, but obviously, I mean, come on, it's Erdogan, and at the end of the day, they're a NATO country. So that's one of the main reasons that Russia pulled out of the original grain deal, the original Black Sea Initiative, is because of the weapons supply to Ukraine. And so this supposedly forbids it, but nothing was mentioned by anyone on how this would be monitored or enforced. Who is going to check commercial ships coming into Ukraine to make sure that they're not carrying weapons or munitions, or something involved in military production. There's none of that specified. No, not about who would do it, about how it would be done, because obviously Russia's not going to trust Turkey to do it anymore. And it's hard to see how anyone other than the Russian Navy would be capable of doing that, because the Montreux Convention regulating traffic in and out of the Black Sea by the Turkish-controlled Dardanelles Straits prohibits, it limits the amount of foreign ships from non-littoral states. You're allowed one ship, into the Black Sea. So obviously it can't be, say, the United States, not that Russia would trust the United States in this particular regard either. So I have to say that the hurdles towards this, both on the sanctions relief on the US side and the implementation that would be necessary, Romania and Bulgaria were already sounding all kind of alarms that they didn't want the status quo changed, precisely because they didn't want Russian ships off their coasts stopping, because this is what Ukraine does, the Ukraine in the West, their ships skirt the NATO coasts all the way up to the Dnieper River and then duck into Odessa, that is what has been going on. And so that would, using a lot of their territorial limits, the waters right off their coast to do this under, some degree of protection. So does that mean that Russia is going to be stopping commercial shipping that could potentially be carrying munitions to Ukraine right off of Romania and Bulgaria's coasts?
It would have to.
There's
no other option.
I don't see that's going to happen.
But there's no other option.
There is the option that this is a dead fish, that there is no hope of this ever being approved, and Russia's conditions, like their conditions for the proposal for a general ceasefire, are simply supposed to highlight how impossible this really is, short of a complete settlement of the conflict.
Mark, I don't think it doesn't have to be impossible. I guess, look, the sanctions were put on by the United States, correct?
Well,
so
there is another possibility. There is a third party that could be involved in inspecting those ships. If the Martian Navy, from the Expanse, could come down and inspect those ships, that might be agreeable to both sides.
With their power armor, just ready to take somebody's head off. I guess my thing is, the U.S. put the sanctions on. I know Europe has their own thing.
Yeah.
Why can't the U.S. remove those sanctions in the way that they put them on, or for that matter,
Congress, because a lot of this will almost certainly have to go through Congress, And Trump does not have, almost certainly does not have the votes to remove these sanctions through Congress.
Even the SWIFT system, I didn't think they went through Congress.
I'm gonna plead ignorant on the detail specifically of the SWIFT system. That may not be involved in Congress, but I'm almost certain that at least some of that must be removed by Congress, I don't know the specific details. I'm not into the sanctions economic nitty-gritty of that. I imagine that there will be reporting on that in the coming days. But already the Washington Post is coming out with saying that this is humiliating for Trump, They're basically saying that Russia is asking for too much and that the U.S. should not agree to it, And so that's almost certainly the narrative. This is the initial assessment, because there's still a little bit of shock about the way that this came out. So it's not being too widely reported yet. Also, it's very technical and it's way above the heads of your average, John Q. public,
it's the Washington Post. Of course, the Washington Post is going to say that. Russia could have came out and said, look, we just want a birthday cake for Putin on his birthday. once a year. And they were like, oh my God, I can't believe they're asking for that. Meaning anything that the Russians were going to ask for, a Western media that is berated, attacked, has not reported this honestly, was going to report it in that way. So
sure, but it's also a good bellwether about how the Democrats and the neocons in Congress are going to react to it.
I guess my feeling is, who cares what they think? I mean,
because you can't remove almost certainly at least some of these sanctions without Congress agreeing to it, and which is always, Putin has pointed this out going back years now as one of the primary reasons that, you know, we can expect sanctions to last for decades.
I guess I get the sense, and I could be wrong, that Donald Trump has been able to bend these people into shape. Democrats will scream and yell. He has no power over them. From the standpoint of Republicans, they have not complained once about what Trump has been doing in regards to these negotiations, despite the fact that they completely disagree with Donald Trump on the negotiations.
They've rolled over and played dead through so far, particularly on his nominations. And I will acknowledge surprise with that and everything. But this is going to require a higher degree of support from Congress to remove these sanctions, right? It's not, we're not looking at a 51-50. We're looking at a 2/3 majority.
So do you think that Russia effectively put out a poison pill? We want to keep the war going. We believe the war is in our best interest. We want to.
I don't know. I mean, maybe technically it's a poison pill, but it's actually also what they would require to make it worth their while to agree to this ceasefire.
See,
they're in the driver's seat. They're in the driver's seat, right?
No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And I did assume that any negotiation was going to go beyond the war because the U.S. has lost the war. And so Donald Trump had to sweeten it with something other than just details on the ground.
U.S. intelligence just came out with an assessment of the conflict today. It was released to the public that even with continued or increased U.S. and Western assistance to Ukraine, that Russia has the upper hand and that is not going to change, which is the first time that that's really been admitted at that level, that frankly.
Give me your overall assessment of all of this. What time is it? Give me your overall assessment of this. I mean, look, I don't think
it hasn't changed much. First of all, it has to be noted that the Russian Ministry of Defense has noted that Ukraine has violated the ceasefire on energy infrastructure again. They've basically done it every day, right? Now, there is evidently some disagreement about when it actually came into effect and when Ukraine agreed to it or not. But certainly in the last 24 hours, right? That was what everyone has agreed to. And they've attacked Russian energy infrastructure again in the last 24 hours. So why Russia is going through the motions of this to continue to signal to Trump how rational, how reasonable they are, and how irrational and unreasonable Ukraine is, right? Russia does not want to be the one blamed for the failure of Trump's drive for peace. Both sides don't want peace, at least as it exists right now. When we're talking the Kiev regime and Russia, neither one wants peace, right? Neither one is satisfied. Neither one has met their war aims. Neither either side has admitted surrender and agreed to the conditions. So, but they also, the U.S. is still such a heavy player involved in this that both sides, all with Trump seemingly desperate, for having invested so much unwisely political capital in announcing that he was going to end this conflict. Russia doesn't want to, make him look bad, right? Because they hope that even if a settlement in Ukraine fails or is not a possibility at all, that at least bilateral relations over the next 4 years with the U.S. can improve let's say, on a separate, only slightly overlapping track. I think Russia is going through the motions at this point. They don't believe that anything is really going to come of this, because the Americans seem completely oblivious on a diplomatic level of what is required for ceasefires, whether we're talking in the Black Sea or general ceasefires or even energy infrastructure. How do we monitor that Ukraine is bombing Russian energy infrastructure? And Ukraine says, no, we're not. And if it was bombed, it was the Russians bombing themselves again, right? Okay, so what happens then?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because that's happened every day so far. And Russia is still not attacking Ukrainian energy infrastructure and saying to Trump, look, we're still playing ball. And Russia can go through the next 30 days suffering this. And, at the end, it's still not going to change anything, because a ceasefire according at least to the American view of how a ceasefire would lead to more substantial peace negotiations, is simply not going to work. Russia is, and meanwhile within Russia, I have to say, there is a great deal of simmering resentment that the Kiev regime is still hitting Russia, violating a ceasefire that Russia didn't need and the Russian military didn't want in the first place, and that Putin appears to just be smiling and taking it. They don't like that. They say, why are we doing this? We're winning. We're beating not just the Kiev regime. We've beaten the U.S. and NATO, right? We can continue to do this. Why are we going through this dog and pony show? Now, Putin has a diplomatic plan, but that being said, Putin has had lots of diplomatic plans since 2014, and not all of them have worked out that well.
So you think this is pointless?
I think this is absolutely pointless. I mean, maybe it keeps China and India happy. I mean, that's that Russia is at least going through the motions, right? That's not nothing, right?
But I think there's value in reestablishing a relationship with the United States.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because I live here.
In 4 years, there's every possibility that there could be another Joe Biden in office. I think that there's very little point in Russia jumping through hurdles to try to restore relations with a country that has killed effectively
hundreds of
thousands of Russians,
yeah,
which is the United States, because
yeah.
ultimately they're responsible.
That 1,000% true. I totally get it. If something can be done to stop all of these people from being killed, I want it to be done. I agree with you that Putin just effectively said, this is what we want. This is what we need.
And in the end, I think that regardless of what is agreed to tomorrow and how long it lasts, right, that until this regime is removed in Kiev, that people in Ukraine and Russia will ultimately continue to die, right? And there is always the possibility that if it, let's say it goes into abatement now, there's some kind of magical ceasefire or peace settlement that is agreed to, and the war is ignited in 4 years again when another U.S. president is in office and the Europeans have rearmed, then there's every possibility that big blow up to Russia and between Russia and NATO directly could that specter could come back. So
let me ask you this last question. What about this notion of Russia extending the negotiations? Basically, we're going to extend this because we're winning. We want to keep going on the battlefield until we get to a certain point, and then we'll stop. And we're willing to negotiate. And ideally, at that point, Ukraine will be weak enough where they would be willing to say, okay, we will also negotiate it this way. Meaning, all of this is being done purely for the sake of continuing the war up until the point where they're ready to call it a day. They've gotten everything that they wanted. They've gotten all the land that they wanted. They negotiated while they were continuing to do this. Like, what do you think of that as a play Meaning, look, they know they're not going anywhere. They know the ask is going to be too much in the short term. But at a certain point, that ask is going to be, let's say, more legit based upon the amount of land that they've taken, and that Europe doesn't want them to go to the Polish border. Trump doesn't want them at the Polish border. I would imagine Ukraine doesn't want all of Ukraine to be taken. Like, meaning maybe there's a sweet spot where, okay, everybody calls it a day.
Yeah, sure. When the Kiev regime is ready for total surrender, but I don't know if that day certainly not near, and they may decide to fight to the end. I mean, if they're removed from Kiev, who says they don't set up shop in Lvov? And and if they're driven out of Lvov, who's to say they don't continue a guerrilla war out of Poland? Right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these people are ideological. And Russian hatred is the primary component of that ideology. Zelensky has a painting of a burning Kremlin right outside his office, right? And of Ukraine, right? So, and he says, "This is where I live. This is victory," right? I mean, he's not talking peace, right? So how can you deal with these people, right? I think, and is there validity to the idea that Russia is needlessly dragging out the diplomacy? No, I don't think it is needlessly. I think Russia is simply going to go through the motions of everything they need to make this worth their while and to get some scrap of legal legitimacy. You know, they're you want to talk a ceasefire? Okay, let's show what would be necessary, a minimum of what would be necessary for a functioning ceasefire that would satisfy us, right? And I don't think that's necessary needlessly, but there's certainly no condition that while Russia goes through this without any hope, I think, of achieving anything out of it, they're going to continue on the battlefield. And again, there's multiple reasons for that. One is to continue to take territory and attrit the Kiev regime military on the ground, always hoping that at some point, hope against hope, that the Kiev regime crumbles in Kiev, right? And that ends this, quicker than it would be otherwise. But at the same time, they also have their eyes on diplomatic contacts with countries like India and Brazil, that it wants to maintain on their side, right? At least, diplomatically, economically, for trade while this is going on. So there's multiple reasons, right, why Russia would go through this. And again, I think they genuinely see at least a temporary window to bilaterally improve relations with the U.S. And they seem to think that there's some advantage in pursuing that. I'm very skeptical of that myself, because everything is in the long run, right? Yeah. We're dealing with a man who signed a ceasefire or brokered a ceasefire with Hamas, then stuffed Israel full of weapons and 2,000-pound bombs, and then completely greenlit, new bombings on Gaza. A man who says, "I care about the people, the beautiful people," and now is killing hundreds of civilians, including children, in Yemen, with U.S. bombing of Yemen, calling them barbarians and that they'll be annihilated. He's a man who one week called Zelensky a dictator, and then the next week said, "Oh, did I say that? It doesn't sound like something I would say." So,
and a man who called for a ceasefire for 30 days and then blew it off immediately. And not blew it off, but Ukraine has now violated the ceasefire, even on the Black Sea and at the energy grids.
Has the U.S. said anything in public about that? Have they even said anything in private to Ukraine?
They have not.
I don't know. The last I don't know about, but they certainly haven't said anything publicly. And if they've said anything privately, it hasn't had any effect.
Well, they need to say something public. I mean, I agree with you. Unfortunately, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Mark,
sorry, my skepticism still overrides. There was more substantial details discussed. There is a plan being presented back to Trump of what Russia could potentially agree to. And the ball's back in Trump's court.
Let me ask you this. Do you think those demands are maximalist? Like, do you think that ultimately, okay, they're putting out these demands, but they'll accept less?
After everything that has been done to Russia, by the US and by the West, absolutely, I do not think that these demands are maximalist. I think that Dmitry Medvedev has put out some good maximalist demands, right, involving the dissolution of Ukraine, of the Kiev regime in Ukraine and Ukraine as a state. That is good maximalist goals that I would fully support after everything that has happened for the Russia. Russia has won this war, right? Whatever they say, they have inflicted a strategic defeat on the United States and NATO. That the political damage to NATO, I don't think NATO's going to fall apart, but it is institutionally and reputationally damaged, right? And Russia has suffered enough in blood and treasure that they should get everything out of this they can, and they should do it in as substantial and overbearing a way as possible for deterrent value, so that the US and Europe will hesitate before coming back for round 2 in 5 years or 10 years.
Agreed. You have my full agreement on that one, Mark. Mark Sabotta, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sabotta1. You can also follow Mark on his YouTube channel at Real Politics with Mark Sabotta. Mark, at Facebook, at facebook.com/Gramsci. Is there anywhere else that people can find you, Mark?
Yeah. I mean, Facebook if you're like my grandparents or something like that. But for everyone else, Substack and Telegram at The Real Politics with Mark Sabotta.
There it is. Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate it, man. Be safe.
Thanks for having me again.
You have a good one. All right. Deeply appreciate Mark for coming on. He didn't have to come on. Usually I try to get him at least once a week. I don't like to bug people too much. So that's why you typically see people once a week. Shout out to him for it. He didn't have to do it. He came on to give an explanation of what was going on. Deeply appreciate him. Look, I appreciate all my guests. Mark is special to me. He tends to be more right. He tends to be more straightforward. And I guess for my take, he tends to be more honest when he talks about this stuff. So there's that. By the way, there's a bit of a backlash taking place against a good friend of the show, Scott Ritter. Ritter came on, he gave his commentary about what was taking place in Ukraine. He gave his commentary about what's taking place on the ground in Gaza. Ritter's point of view has flipped on that issue. And because it's flipped on that issue, the audience was bewildered. I was bewildered. It caught me off guard in real time. Oftentimes I was pushing back on him, basically asking probing questions about his take. The commentary on that video is brutal. I've never had a video where it's like 1,000 comments and 999 and a half are negative and brutal and being negative. Keep in mind, brutal is contextual. There's some channels, I always say channels are worlds, meaning the host of that channel on some level creates a world where the audience is similar, or at the very least thinks similar to the host. Even if they're on the outskirts, they're close enough where they're in the orbit of what the host thinks. And so it sets context for the way the channel operates, how the channel and the people in the channel act. Even if you have trolls, you might have one of two. The majority and the thrust of it is in a similar vein as the host. You may have some channels that are just brutally racist, some brutally sexist, some very woke. So the host sets the context. So my channel tends to be a little bit more cerebral. And so the people are not insane. And so even when they're brutal, it's not obscene. But it was brutal. It was brutal. And apparently, it's not just my channel. I saw George Galloway talking about the backlash that Scott Ritter has been facing as a result of his switch on Gaza. I don't know why the 180 took place as a flat fact. I don't know why. Ritter is a good friend of the show. He's an adult. He could take a backlash like anybody else could take a backlash. I think a lot of it comes because it's a 180. It's a radical shift in point of view during the Trump administration. I suspect it'll blow over. Scott Ritter can make his own points about why he has that point of view. I think I will tell you, putting Ritter to the side for the moment, that is a maddening issue, at least for me. I followed the Gaza issue for decades. I have to be honest, it was the Ukraine issue that radicalized me. Like when you're working at a Russian radio station and you are seeing a war take place that never needed to take place, never needed to happen, and was egged on all the way through. That is shocking. At the very least, it was shocking to me. The Gaza issue has been shocking to me for somewhat of a different reason. We have sat here and watched a genocide take place with our own eyes, watching our cell phones. And on some level, the ability to see something gives this sometimes mistaken impression that you have the ability to affect it. And in watching it, you think to yourself, how can this be happening in a modern day? It's 2025. How on earth are we watching people wantonly, feverishly, almost with a certain degree of glee, murder women and children and do it day in and day out? But they got like 400 people over the course of a few days. Like, those numbers are really hard to wrap your head around in a modern day. And you watch it day after day, just people being mangled, kids getting shot, women being shot. It is disturbing, right? And then you see how this expands in Lebanon, expands into Syria, and not just expands into Syria, expand into Syria in a way where jihadists are put into power of a country. Something, by the way, that ISIS was trying to do the first time around, that we assisted them the second time around because he shaved his beard and put on a suit. I watched video of a child, a little girl, being beaten, kicked, and punched by grown men because she had a different faith. Like, all of these things are coming out of the Gaza issue. Even the beefing with Iran, where Iran does the true promise stuff. Part of their rationale for it was Israel is going after all of these countries. We could be next. We need to show deterrence. Okay, again, but all of this stuff sparked off because of Gaza. And not just October 7th. You're talking about something that's been going on for decades. There doesn't seem to be any movement. It seems like an impossible issue. And it feels like you're banging your head against this thing that doesn't move, that doesn't change, that you can't do anything about, because the very principles that are involved in it, at the very least one, is like, if we give them a state, we don't want to do that. Nor do we want to have one state, one man, one vote, because it's no longer Israel. So we don't want any of those options. Okay, so we're back to either killing 2 million people in Gaza or expelling them out of the country. And fact of the matter is, Egypt and Jordan, we're not taking them. Now, you may come up with a solution where you ethnically cleanse, call it what it is, people into Syria, because Jelani is effectively, under control by Turkey, and wouldn't, under any circumstances, raise a gun, fire a bullet in anger against Israel, despite the fact that Israel's taken Syrian territory that he ostensibly claims is his. This is a mess. All of this is a mess. We're in the middle of this mess. Our little colony that's expanding and taking territory in Syria, Lebanon, etc. I would imagine. Add one more thing to it. Hamas celebrated when Assad fell. They celebrated Now, the notion that you're celebrating what is going to eventually look like Libya and Iraq is disturbing. Scott mentioned that during his speech. He pointed out, yeah, they were celebrating when Assad fell. Like, what the F? And you can imagine on some level that may piss you off. It's like we're pushing for the liberation of Palestine. And through the liberation of Palestine, Hamas is the thing that is fighting for that liberation. You may not like it. You may say they're grisly. All that may be true. But they're doing that stuff for reasons. And then they turn around and celebrate the fall and what is going to be the mass murder of minority communities. Okay, well, that's disturbing. That leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And there was something Ritter pointed out in his speech. I understand that a lot of people believe that Ritter's point of view is oriented around Trump. I can't speak to that. I don't know. I don't know what's in the man's heart. I do know he mentioned the Hamas thing. That's aggravating. I would say Hamas and the Palestinians are different entities, even though you could say Hamas is the liberation group. It's a mess. And it feels like a mess that doesn't change, if that makes sense. It feels like there's no resolution to it, that you're just plugging away at it. You watch all of these Arab states that just watch all of these Palestinians get killed. Don't fire one bullet in anger, and not just not fire a bullet in anger. Protect the airspace so Israel can do its bombing rates to go after Iran. Like, this stuff is rather astonishing when you think about it. And yet, here we are. It seems that Ritter felt some kind of way about it. So, look, I don't know. I mean, his thing is there needs to be solutions. And up to this point, there have been none. Okay, that may be true. He doesn't believe that Gaza is the central issue. I think that's false. I think all of the stuff that's happening revolves, and I guess the point I'm trying to make, all of it revolves around Gaza. If you solve Gaza issue, many of the other issues kind of fold away. Hezbollah becomes less of an issue. Lebanon becomes less of an issue. Well, Syria is no longer an issue because that's under they've been balkanized. But even Iran, on some level, becomes less of an issue. If you remember, a lot of Iran's rhetoric, anyway, was coming out of this idea of we're standing up for Gaza. Okay, well, what happened when Gaza is solved? The Red Sea is no longer an issue. Houthis stopped firing missiles into Tel Aviv. I think it's the issue. I think it's the central issue. And maybe the thought is, okay, we can't do anything about that, but we can do something about this other stuff. Okay, but again, that doesn't really do anything about the other stuff. It's still an issue, and it's still an adjutant to all of the other crises in the region. So, look, my point of view, and this is different than Scott's. I do appreciate his point of view on it. He's always welcome to the show. People having a different point of view than me all the time. So what? That was the entire point of fault lines. And he can defend himself on his points of view. So I think you're allowed to be against Ukraine, but you have to be a Zionist. I don't think that's the case. I think that's just the government that's in play now, Adrian. I'm sorry, skeptical jerk. Oh, by the way, we're coming to the end. I saw the thing with George Galloway, and I thought it was interesting that Galloway pointed it out. I got to be honest. I've read those comments because I do read the comments on my videos. It slightly freaked me out. And what I mean by it, look, if I disagree with the guest, I disagree with the guest. It doesn't cross my mind in the context of the show. Reading the comments after the fact, it did cross my mind like, oh my God, if Ritter reads this, he's never going to come back on. But I guess my rule is the same rule we had on fault lines. If a guest decides not to come back on because you disagree with them, then oh well. You can't run a show that way. You have to be able to disagree with the guests. You have to be able to get across. Otherwise, what's the point? Your own audience is going to eat your laugh if you don't. Not to mention, it's kind of the point of the show, right? Yeah, I want to have an interview, and yes, I want my guests to be able to give their points of view and be able to talk. But this is not a soliloquy. This is not a monologue. It's an interview. And yeah, I'm going to poke into the interview if there's something either I don't understand or something I want to clarify, or for that matter, something I disagree with. It's an interview. I'm going to give my guests time to make their points fully. And even in that, I let Scott make his points. Even if I was priding him, I'd let him make his points. But yeah, apparently that's been an issue on multiple shows, where that 180 and the backlash against the 180 that Ritter brought up. I don't know if my show was first. My show was the first time I saw it, which I'm a bit proud of. But apparently it was taking place on other shows. So, but I want to bring this to an end. British should be stronger than him not coming back. Now, I don't know if that's the case. I'm just saying it crossed my mind. That's all crossed my mind. Scott sees the forest, spike the freeze. Look, Ritter is a fantastic guest. Whether I agree with him or not, everything that comes out of his mouth sounds infinitely true. Like he infinitely believes it, right? That's what it comes across, whether he does or not. He's a great guest. High energy, strong on whatever he's talking about. Again, whether you agree with him or not, agreement is not the point. It's never the point. Agreement is never the destination. My show, and the reason why I do it in this particular way, I want the guests to make their point. Whatever their point is. I would prod, I would poke, I would agree, disagree, all those things, but I want them to make their points. And I will name the video based upon the point that they're making, not upon my own point of view of whatever they're making, if that makes sense. I appreciate Ritter coming on. I appreciate him giving a different point of view on the issue. The only way I know that my point of view is correct is to have a disagreement with the other person where you nail down, okay, what's more likely to be true, if that makes sense. My goal is not an echo chamber. I don't know what my guest is going to say when my guest comes on the show. I say, hey, I want to talk about the subject. I have my own point of view of that subject when I bring the guests onto the show. And if I agree with them, great. If I disagree with them, great. We talk about it. That's the point. In fact, the disagreements make the show more interesting, all things being equal. So I'm going to end this. I'm going to thank all of you for joining me. I'm going to ask all of you to hit the like button. I'm going to say you can share. Oh, I'm sorry. You can support this content through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats. Super stickers are also a thing. I want to go to my chats and the people who are supporting the content. Ratso B. Harris. I hope you interviewed Deb Holland. Why is that name familiar? I think she's been on the show. I will try to look her up. I think sometimes you guys think my reach is more expensive than it is. I'm just a humble podcaster. People often tell me no, or just don't respond, but I'll check her out. I'll try. Red Dragon, have some of this Uber driver cash, Jamal. Red Dragon, thank you. Uber doesn't pay well. Thank you. I'm not going to say it. Thank you. I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Just, I know Uber doesn't pay well. So it feels some kind of way taking Uber money. But thank you for it. You gave it. I want to thank you. The well-dressed nerd. This isn't a Star Trek episode, so there is no utopia. No, Bray, there's no utopia, but we can work towards it. What if? What if? And I know we have a capitalist system, so they're not going to do this. But what if government comes into play and the government says, you know what? We are going to use AI. We're going to build robots. We're going to build machines. And we're going to spend the next 50 years making this planet a paradise. We don't want people to work if they don't have to. What we want people to do is engage in activities they enjoy, with the exception of, I don't know, spending 5 years of their life doing labor. Because even though we've automated all of these processes and we've built all of these systems, it still requires a bit of labor in regards to manpower. And so we will make a social contract that if you work from 20 to 30 or from 20 to 25, you will get benefits for the rest of your life. Live where you want or how you want. Engage in whatever activity you enjoy. That is our social contract. We have the technology to do that, by the way. We could do that. We just don't do that. We've gotten so accustomed to this idea of survival as being, and it's not shocking. I mean, you spend the entirety of human existence barely surviving. Like, put that in context, right? Like, all that we know as a human species is survival. I would argue the entire premise, I would argue that the entire motif, I'm saying this poorly, things replicate. Meaning you have one bit of logic and you let that bit of logic fly and you come out with an outcome based on that one bit of logic, even though the things that are above it seem very complicated. I would argue survival is that thing. This idea of you have a system, that system needs things to survive, in which case the system has to get those things. And the catch becomes, how does it get those things? And everything else is built kind of above it. So I need to eat, I need clean air, I need clean water, I need some kind of structure that allows me to grow and be a part of. If I don't have any of those, if I miss any of that, I suffer in some way. I'm damaged in some way. If I don't get food, okay, I'm gonna die. If I don't get water, I'm gonna die. If I don't get this kind of structure of sorts, I'm gonna go rogue, or at the very least, I'm gonna go rogue, whatever that means. Or at the very least, be alienated. Okay, so how do you do that? For the entirety of human existence, it was a struggle for the overwhelming majority of the human population. And what they understood is, if I don't get those things, I will suffer. I'm going to be hungry. I'm going to, not be intact in some way. Being hungry sucks. Being thirsty sucks. Living in garbage sucks. Being alienated sucks. I need to ensure that I get those things that I need. And then you say, okay, well, I have an idea. Who is going to do the labor to get those things? Okay, well, much of the time it's me, but at a certain point I decide, okay, hey, I have an idea. I'll come up with a system that allow people to do labor in order to get these things. And we can come up with a system where we pay people to get those things. Okay, now you've developed a system, but you've created bubbles in that system where you have some people with radical amounts and other people with nothing. Okay, well, that's a problem too. The people with nothing are going to do whatever they need to do in order to get something. And so you get issues of crime, poverty, homelessness, etc. And you get a society that is so wed to this idea of survival that if a person is not working, you look at them particularly. You're not pulling your fair share. You're not pitching in. You're not supporting the system in whatever you are doing. Hell, if you're working at Kmart, you're still working at Kmart, providing a benefit to society. We see people that don't work in a particular light because survival has been so ingrained into us that it's an anathema for the person to not work. Okay, well, what happens when you can construct a society where that work is not really even all that necessary for the majority of the population, or at the very least, for the length of time that the people work, meaning you're doing a task as a pointless endeavor, when really you could construct your society in a way where we're like, we have decided as a collective that this work stuff It's for the birds. Yeah, we will work for a particular time period, but all of this, what we do and the way that we struggle is completely unnecessary. We need to change our world. That is not on the table. And to make it even worse, when you get things like automation, where you will definitely get automated cars, you would definitely get automated stores, meaning I walk into a store, I might not even need to take my credit card out of my pocket, depending upon the technology that's involved. I pick up a soda, I pick up a Krispy Kreme donut, it's automatically hit. I walk out the store, almost seamless. Yeah, you have a clerk floating around, you may have a security guard floating around, but for all intents and purposes, this idea of having 5, 6, 10 people working at the store, that might be able to be brought down to 2. Your Grubhub driver. Okay, well, if you have a drone delivering and dropping something at your door, well, that driver becomes unnecessary. And I will tell you that the incentive for corporations is to get rid of the human element, because the human element is expensive. If I can get a hamburger machine that will pop out hamburgers, okay, well, it's not going to get blue. It's not going to, be pissed off that his boyfriend sent a bad text message. None of that stuff takes place. It does it all day. I might have to pay, whatever I pay. I don't have to continuously pay it a wage. That is going to have downstream effects on all of us. How does your government and society that has spent the entirety of its existence working because it needed to for the issue of survival? Okay, now when you don't need to do that, where your society is building these jobs and not doing it in this kind of Star Trek way, but doing it in this capitalistic way where a few people make radical amounts of cash because they no longer need human beings or workers. And yet you have workers who still need food, who still need water, who still need the basic necessities, and has been oriented to work because they've done it for the entirety of our human existence. What does that look like? And how does your society deal with that? Is there going to be, a stipend coming from the government? Is there going to be just outright poverty because society doesn't know how to deal with it? Like, Brave, I know you said this was in a Star Trek episode, fair enough. But we're going to hit that any way you look at it. And we can either hit it from this angle of common heritage, meaning the world is a common resource, or we're going to hit it in this kind of Elon Musk capitalistic expanse type environment scenario where we fall ass backwards into it. And we need to figure out some way to effectively deal with it, while I would imagine, in that case, allowing these billionaires to become trillionaires and giving people a pittance to subsist. I think that sucks. I think that sucks. If you think that they have a huge amount of political power now, I would wager to you that your political device is going to be irrelevant. So we either deal with it head on as a society that recognizes, okay, this is going to be a major shift in human affairs. What does it look like when we've evolved to a point where we're no longer in a survival motif, but we're in an abundance motif? And a lot of the stuff and the structures that we set up prior are not just irrelevant, but counterproductive. Oh, I'm so cynical. Brave, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think you're right. I think we fall ass backwards into it. And I think we fall ass backwards into it in a way where we are just screwed. Ebony Knight, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Scott Ritter could be compromised. Oh, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say that. I don't know what's in his mind. Oh, thank you, Ebony. And you put me on the spot with a $50 thing. I don't know that. I don't want to say that. I don't know what is in his mind. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to say he just has a different take for whatever reason. He has a different take. Yeah, I'll say that. I mean, I don't know what is in mind. Right? Is it possible there are other incentives? Maybe, but I don't know that. I would take his argument at face value for the time being. And I would give him the benefit of the doubt and just say he had a different take and a different point of view. I can always revisit that if more evidence is submitted. But right now, he's been a good guest. He's been a good friend of the show. I will be loyal to somebody who's been a friend of the show that didn't need to be a friend of the show. You can hit me for that. I think loyalty is a good thing. I would want the same thing from somebody else. It just has a different point of view. And I know we always want to attribute other things to when people change their points of view, but it could be what he said it is. And I accept what he said it is, even if I disagree with it. I go with that. Yeah, I go with that. Yes, people can't handle the truth. No, sometimes it just kind of depends. Miss Fritter's interview, but you can listen to this interview from yesterday on the Savvy section, or you can listen to it on my show. That video got like 27,000 views. I would greatly appreciate it if you listen to that one. Love Savvy, by the way. Savvy is fantastic. But you can listen to it on mine also. DW. Fritter's argument are often emotion driven, so that can change from day to the next. We can be like that if we're lucky enough not doing it in front of an audience. Well, no, I disagree. Look, Ritter has had a similar argument on Gaza for as long as I've known him. He has been very strong on the Gaza issue for as long as I've known him. And you heard him in my interview where he pointed out, look, they need to get themselves together and figure out what they are. And when he points to Hamas and he says, this is who's fighting for Gaza, and when he comes out in support, he's attacked for it. So again, like, he is making an argument, and he is making an argument explaining his take and why his take is what it is. So you could say, okay, he's changing for something else. Okay, fair enough, maybe, maybe not. But he is giving you the details of his argument that you can, go into as he's giving it in regards to why he's coming to a particular conclusion. Now, I guess my thing is, you can disagree with the conclusion, even though he's giving you the details of why he's coming to a conclusion. Meaning, it's kind of like Malik. I remember Malik Alang was in an argument one day, and Malik says, look, I understand your point. I just don't agree. And that may just be where you have to be with Scott on this one. I understand your point. I just disagree. If that makes sense. Remember the selfie Reddit took with RFK Jr. Where is this? And the run up to the election could be something there. Oh, Masters in 22. I don't want to say that. Like I said, I can always revisit. But I'll take his argument as the way he gave it. I'll take it as he gave it. Give him better examples and watch his analysis change. Yeah, I mean, like I said, his analysis did change. That's why the audience has been flipped out. That's why there's a backlash. The fact that Galloway pointed it out makes me realize, okay, it's not just my show. Ritter apparently said this on a few shows, and he got backlash for his take. People change their points of view sometimes. People evolve. I don't know if this is an evolution that I would agree with, but people evolve. They come to different assessments as they get older, or as they come to new information, or as things happen. So his point of view changed. Is what it is. I still love him as a guest. I still want him back on the show. And I hope he comes back on the show. Look, I would tell you, people will have different takes than me. That doesn't change my point of view of them all the time. Not all the time. It depends on the take. But in the sense of Ritter has been a good friend of the show, and he didn't need to be. I mean, Ritter could have been like, oh, I'm only getting 27,000 on, well, total 40K, but I'm only getting 40,000 on your show. Well, I'm going to the show and get 100,000. So I feel like he has done me a favor by coming on the show and has been loyal to the show. I suspect it comes out of fault lines, but I don't care. So no, I'm not gonna bash, abandon. I remain loyal to him because of it. I appreciate him for doing so. I would take his point of view as his point of view. Just a point of view I disagree with. When new information comes, new options. Yeah, skeptical jerk. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the new information is. But he clearly has come to a different assessment. 6% practicing. He's a grifter. Video on the topic of addiction of negative to video. Good. Scott is not a moral entity. He's a realist. Damascus. Well, I never said he was a moral entity. I mean, he is a realist. I mean, he's a military guy, right? So from his point of view, but some of the stuff I just disagree with. Like the idea that Iran should give up nuclear weapons. Okay, why? Who that for you, right? They are a sovereign country, and like any sovereign country, they can do what they want. Now, Israel literally has nuclear weapons. Israel blows off every agreement that it comes up with. So this notion that the non-proliferation treaty should be a hedge. No, well, if you're a realist, you're a realist. That's a piece of paper. It's not real. And one of your geopolitical enemies that is backed by another enemy has nukes. And so Iran has not said that it was trying to get nukes. It is what is a fatwa against nukes. The Ayatollah has effectively ruled them out, saying they're not necessary for what it wants to do. But that doesn't mean that you give up your nuclear power infrastructure for it. Meaning, it doesn't mean that you make yourself dependent upon another country. I don't know what country would do that. Now, you could say, well, yeah, but, you know, hashtag, if it's life isn't fair, that may be true, but I wouldn't do it either. Like, I may change my mind. If I change my mind, I'm going to be ass out. I could change my mind tomorrow, pull out the nuclear proliferation treaty and say, I'm getting nukes. Israel has nukes. You don't want to own up to it? Fair enough. I'm getting nukes. Like, meaning countries change their minds in regards to policy. Look at what the U.S. is doing. The U.S. has decided overnight, we want to make a deal with Russia. Okay, well, that's new. That's a mind change. I don't know. I guess personally, I have issues in general with, I don't want to say commitment. I was married for 10 years. But commitment, where you can't back away from it, where you've effectively allowed yourself to be completely dependent upon another country, even if that country is an ally, it's still dependency, right? Something to be said for sovereignty. Also, if I'm Iran, I know that if the US attacks me, Trump's presidency is toast. Complete and utter toast. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm rambling. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. I want to thank all of you for joining me. You guys are fantastic. I could not ask for a better audience. We are growing. We're at 45,000. That number is amazing to me. Even though the number is very small, it's still amazing to me. I feel like I built it. I have a sense of pride in doing it, and I appreciate y'all for joining me and allowing me to do it. Can't do it without you. Yeah, can't do it without you. I appreciate all of you. And again, thank all of you for support of the show. You can do so through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Super Sticker, memberships. All of those things are valid. I want to give a shout out to all of my members, by the way. The Thomas family has been growing day by day. I appreciate all of you. You have no idea. I really do. Like, share, subscribe. Episode 122. Signing off. Have a good one, all. Be safe. Keep up the good work. Joseph Haunton, I am trying. I am trying. This has been complicated, to put it mildly. When the job went belly up on October 15th, I was like, all right, well, let me do my show. Let me see if there's an audience for it. I'll go back to it. And the things that I learned on radio, I decided, okay, well, I'll take the best of what I learned on radio, and I take the best of what my show was before radio, and I combine them, and I do my own show, and it'd be on domestic and international policy. And it's a head trip sometimes, because you feel like you're plugging away, and it's so unpredictable because you don't have control of the items that you use. Like, for example, guests. I don't control my guests. I hope they want to come on. I hope they enjoy their time on the show. I don't know it as a flat fact because I don't know what's in their minds. And yet, it's an element that you're effectively dependent upon in order to do your show. Otherwise, it's just you talking for 3 hours, which nobody wants. I certainly don't. You don't control the audience. You don't control the news cycle. You don't control whether something is interesting. You don't even really control what's interesting to you. Like, I can only, show's named Jamal Thomas. I only do, news that I'm interested in. And it's like, okay, well, what if there's a story that is super important that just so happens not interesting to you? Now, on the radio show, you had multiple people that were working. And so you got this kind of mix of ideas, a mix of things of people saying, hey, by the way, this is a big story. You don't want to miss the story. Really? That's a big story? Yes, it's a big story. We need to cover it. And you come to find out they were right. It was a big story. You lack that stuff when you're doing it on your own. Then you add to it this other factor of being a leaf in the wind. My cousin and I, and look, this is beyond the show at this point, so this is inside baseball. This is behind the scenes stuff. My cousin and I were driving because he was helping me move. And he was like, so you're telling me that everything you have is just in the car? I said, well, I have alcohol in my mom's house. Every country I go to, I get alcohol from the country, specific to the country. He's like, so that was the thing to which you found most important to keep? Yeah. Everything else, like that stuff was from the marriage. I didn't know where I was going to end up. And so it was like, okay, well, I can't take it with me. So the only thing I could take with me was stuff I could pack in the car. That stuff went to my mom's. Most of that considered just alcohol. And he says, yeah, cuz I don't know how you do that. And I was like, it wasn't intentional. Like, it just happened. And it just became this kind of thing of, all right, at some point, I need to find somewhere to put down roots. I don't know what's happening in the negotiations, and I need a few months to be able to see where they go. And so I'll be a leaf in the wind for a few months. Okay, that sucks. Like, it's like 1 month you're here, and another month you're in another place, another month you're in another place, another month you're in another place. Now, my ex and I did this when we were traveling, but doing it in the States is bizarre, completely bizarre. And then it's like, all right, you still got to do a show, still got to book your guests, still got to cut your videos, still got to study the news to figure out what's going on, still got to look at other podcasts to get other ideas and perspectives. Basically, you still got to do what you were doing on the radio show, or for that matter, doing it religiously. It's a job, and you got to treat it as a job, even though all of these things are somewhat unpredictable. And then it's like that on top of, okay, where am I going to stay? How much is it going to cost? Can I afford it? It's just a lot. I appreciate you saying good work and keep it up. I will definitely keep it up. I would definitely keep kicking ass. My job at this point is to do content. And that's what I plan on doing. And I plan on catching everybody else's food in regards to my numbers. It's just a contest. It's a what's what I'm looking for? It's a competition in my mind. At the very least, get more numbers than everybody else that was at Sputnik. First off. 2, catch everybody else everywhere, whatever their numbers are. I know it's a niche space, so fair enough, but my job is to grow the channel. At least that's what I identified. I should say that's my indirect job. Being consistent is the job. Hopefully the channel will grow from being consistent. All right, I'm going to end this. You're already on the path, brother. I'm trying, man. I'm trying. Systems don't do good. Don't know what that means. And I don't know if that applies to me. You guys, I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and I will see you tomorrow, bright and early, same time, same place. Jamal Thomas Morning Show, episode 122. Signing off. I might get some chess in today. Yeah, I might get some chess in today. We'll see. Have a good one. Oh, by the way, Garland and I, 4 p.m. I need to check to see if he's still down for today. We weren't able to do Monday because I was in transit. I was moving. But we should be able to get the show in today. And talking about the deal will be paramount, first and foremost, at least from my side. You all have a fantastic day. Signing off.